The Space Shuttle Atlantis is still on the ground, and that's not where the planners of the ship's joint US-Russian mission wanted to be. CNN's John Holliman is here with us. John, why is it on the ground? What's the problem?
Bad weather. The shuttle itself is in good shape. They had a little leak that they were able to fix the other day, but there was a lightning storm with a lot of thunder and lightning right around the shuttle this morning, about 4 hours ago, when they had to start pumping liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen into that big fuel tank that you see on the side of the thing. If we can get a picture, I'll show you how it looked this morning when they were trying to fuel. They couldn't even do the fueling because the weather was so bad. The weather in Florida continues to be bad. The launch was scheduled for about 4 hours from now. They think there'll be a lot of lightning and thunder, and they don't want the shuttle to take off in a lightning storm because it could blow up that fuel, and that would be the worst possible thing that could happen. But as the mission continues in its planning stage, the NASA managers think they'll be able to get it up about 20 hours from now. Every day that they delay, it gets about 30 minutes earlier in the day. And it looks like they'll still be able to meet their goals of linking up with the Russian space station on Monday and bringing the shuttle home by the 4th of July. Even though stormy weather at the launch pad delayed the liftoff of Atlantis, NASA still plans to dock the shuttle with the Russian Mir space station on Monday. This will be the 100th time the U.S. has launched people into orbit, and the crew says it's ready to explore closer cooperation with the Russians than ever before. The highlight will come 3 or 4 days after launch, when Atlantis will dock with the Russian space station Mir.
Yeah, the docking is the whole reason for the mission being there. The crew exchange is the whole reason for us to be up there.
Commander Gibson has practiced docking in the shuttle simulator hundreds of times, and he's never missed. He and his pilot, Charlie Precourt, and flight engineer Greg Harbaugh will be very busy as the shuttle approaches the Russian space station. After docking, thrusters on the underside of Atlantis will fire, forcing it against the Russian docking adapter. That adapter is the key to a successful mission.
It's really a Swiss watch kind of mechanism. There's all kinds of bells and whistles and pulleys and things, and we've seen it operate with the covers off, and it's really a piece of work.
Once the docking is complete, the rest of the crew gets down to business. Dr. Ellen Baker and astronaut Bonnie Dunbar will open up the space lab, making it ready for fellow astronaut Norm Thagard and 2 cosmonauts who've all been living aboard Mir for more than 3 months. The Mir crew will come over to the shuttle for a series of medical tests that'll take days to complete. Those tests may determine whether the rest of us ever get to travel in space. The idea is to find out how the body changes after all that time in weightlessness.
We're trying to sort through all of these different changes, understand them very thoroughly, and then we'll develop countermeasures for them.
2 Russian cosmonauts will ride into orbit on the shuttle. They say the major accomplishment of this mission, at least for them, will be closer cooperation between 2 former enemies.
We have to learn about not each other's differences, but how we can enrich each other's practices and to contribute to each other's cosmonautics and space.
If this mission succeeds, there will be at least 6 more shuttle trips to dock with Mir. And starting a little more than a year from now, the 2 countries, with help from Europe, Japan, and Canada, will begin launching huge pieces of a new international space station into orbit. I talked to the administrator of NASA, Dan Golden, a few hours ago, Sonia, and he said he is just like a little kid. He's so excited about seeing this docking take place, and he hopes it'll take place on Monday.
And it looks like an extraordinary technical achievement. The other thing, John, you were mentioning there in your report about they're going to study the problems of weightlessness. Now, whenever we see a mission come back to Earth, they always look in really good shape. What do we know about the problems of these long-term weightlessness?
Well, the things that affect you every time you get weightless, apparently, is your blood cells become, you have less blood, more white blood cells in your veins, and so you're sort of anemic. Your bones are more brittle and thinner than they were before you left by a small amount. But these folks have been up since the 13th of March, the 3 people who were up on the space station. And they are anticipating having cardiovascular problems, having kidney stones in their bodies, having their bone mass much reduced. And so what's going to happen is after they get aboard the shuttle, they'll go into the space lab, which is just set up to be a hospital, basically. And they'll lie down in the hospital, and they'll do whatever they can as far as countermeasures go to help them readapt to gravity. But one thing that you won't see at the end of this mission, when the shuttle gets home, those 3 people won't be shown on television walking around the shuttle and kicking the tires, as crews often do at the end of a mission. They're going to be put into this people mover that is the NASA version of what you see at some airports in Europe and the United States, and they'll be taken off to a hospital because they're going to be very, very weak because the effects of gravity they will not have experienced for so many months.
John, if the shuttle cannot go up in 20 hours' time, as you say, on Saturday, does that mean that this docking cannot happen, or will it be delayed further?
They'll continue to delay it day after day after day until they get a good weather day. They really want to do this. This is a keystone of the U.S. and Russian space cooperation, and if they can't do this, there's no telling that they'll be able to do a space station. So everybody wants this to happen, and it may take them up to a week before you know, they start really getting worried about whether they'll do it. There's a backup to get those 3 people off of the space station. The Russians have one of their rescue ships on the ground ready to go and can get them off so they don't have to stay there forever. And Norm Thagard, the American, who thought he'd be up there for about 90 days and who's been up more than 100 now, is really ready to come home.
Now, in terms, you were explaining to us how difficult it was technically to actually get them to join up. Does it, as I see you have these 2 space entities going at such speed, does it get more and more difficult to do? Do they have to readjust all their computers? What happens?
Yeah, what actually happens, and I've talked to all of the astronauts who are going to be involved in this about what they will be doing physically. They have a thing like police radar detectors, a radar detector gun. Greg Harbaugh, the engineer, will be pointing that gun out the window of the shuttle as the Mir gets closer. The shuttle will actually be moving toward the Russian space station, and it'll be telling them how fast they are approaching, how fast they are closing. And at one point, they have to, when they're about 5 feet apart, their rate of approach has to be much slower than this, and the amount of leeway they have is about this much to have the 2 docking adapter parts hit right where they're supposed to. Hoot Gibson, the commander, will be at the controls driving the space shuttle, and he's had about 100 tries at this, and he's never failed. So he's never missed in the simulator. Let's see what he does next week in the weightlessness and the excitement of being there in space.
We look forward to that. John Holliman, CNN's John Holliman, thank you.
Okay, Sonia, nice to see you.
And now it's time for a check of the international weather forecast. And for that, we go to CNN's meteorologist, Ted Texter.
We check out the North American continent. Really a contrast here. In the south and the east of the United States, rain showers. Mid-sections, there are rain showers as well. But to the north, there's still plenty of cool to cold air in the mountains. Skiing will continue, they think, in the north and the west of the United States through most of the year, most of the summer. Across most of eastern Canada, through the central sections, rain showers still in the forecast.
Rain delayed today's scheduled launch of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, which is to bring an American and 2 of the Russians back to Earth. NASA rescheduled the launch for Saturday, but bad weather's predicted then as well. If that liftoff is delayed, then the Mir crew would have to stay in orbit a little longer than planned. 2 Russians will be aboard Atlantis when it does go up, and they'll replace the men currently on the Mir for the past 3 months.
Blitz und Donner hielten die Raumfähre Atlantis auf dem Startpodest fest. Denn bei einem Gewitter ist das Sicherheitsrisiko beim Auftanken zu groß, meinen die Techniker. Doch in der NASA-Zentrale gibt man sich optimistisch. Denn die 100. bemannte Raumfahrtmission der USA ist nicht nur ein Jubiläum schlechthin. Sie soll gleichzeitig die amerikanisch-russische Zusammenarbeit im Weltraum wieder auf- und vor allem fortleben lassen. Das ist sicher nicht das schlechteste Ziel nach einem jahrzehntelangen Wettlauf. Bei diesem Rennen kam schließlich 1969 das Sternenbanner auf den Mond. Und auch diese Bilder von der Soyuz-Apollo-Mission sind schon 20 Jahre alt. Ähnlich wie einst 1975 soll es wieder geschehen. Jetzt wird Atlantis 2 russische Kosmonauten zur Station Mir in den Orbit und auf dem Rückweg einen Amerikaner und 2 Russen zur Erde bringen.
Das Reinitiating-Zentrum in Moskau bis 92 ein geschlossener Betrieb von der Größe einer Kleinstadt. Inzwischen hat sich der Raketenhersteller geöffnet, aber ungeachtet unserer Drehgenehmigung dürfen wir auf dem Gelände nicht filmen, nur Innenaufnahmen von bestimmten Objekten gestattet uns der Sicherheitsbeauftragte. Seit 1964 werden hier die Protonträgerraketen hergestellt, 12 Monate Produktionszeit. Im Vorjahr baute Chrunichev 13 Protons. Ab 97 sollen sie auch für den Westen ins All abheben. Die Raumstation Mir, seit 9 Jahren im Dienst. An der Montage war das Zentrum maßgeblich beteiligt. Wenn die Raumstation Mir 1997 ausgedient haben wird, soll sie erstmals von einer gemeinsamen russisch-amerikanischen Station Alpha ersetzt werden. Seit 3 Jahren wird versucht, langes Konkurrenzdenken in Vertrauen umzuwandeln. Das Projekt Alpha, keine Theorie mehr. Viel Geld wurde bereits investiert, von den Amerikanern mehr als von den Russen. Nach dem Soyuz-Apollo-Unternehmen 1975 wird nun zum 2. Mal ein amerikanisches Raumschiff bei den Russen ankoppeln. Der russische Alpha-Direktor zeigt uns die Stelle, wo die Atlantis an die Mir andocken soll. Die Russen sind optimistisch. Ein Zurück kann es nicht mehr geben, weist Sergei Schajewitsch, Alpha-Kritiker, zurück. Alles wurde detailliert ausgehandelt, wer wie viele Flüge übernehmen wird, wer welches Teil baut. So viel wie eingebracht wird, so groß wird der Anteil an den wissenschaftlichen Ergebnissen sein. Der russische etwa 30–40%. Der Energieversorgungsblock für Alpha. Er wird vom Chronischew-Zentrum bereits gebaut. Die amerikanische Raumfahrtbehörde NASA hat den Russen $400 Millionen dafür gegeben. Viel Geld, und es reicht dennoch nicht. Auch das zukünftige Arbeitsmodul nimmt im Zentrum Chronischew schon Gestalt an. Die Russen waren den Amerikanern beim Bau von Raumstationen immer um Jahre voraus. Die Amerikaner entwickelten dafür die bessere Raumfähre. Dass nun beides sich zusammenfügen wird, die Russen glauben an Alpha. Nach der gelungenen Shuttle-Mir-Ankopplung könnte die Alpha-Projektierung im All beginnen. 40 Flüge müssen dafür absolviert werden. Die Russen haben nur noch ein Kommunikationsproblem im Weltraum. Kaum ein russischer Kosmonaut spricht richtig Englisch.
Now it's gassed up and ready to go, but now officials only want the skies to clear the way for the Space Shuttle Atlantis. John Holliman joins us now here with all the details. John, how good does it look?
Well, it doesn't look very good, Sonia. Dave Hennon, CNN's weatherman, just told me that there's a band of weather out in the Gulf of Mexico that's moving over Florida right now. As you know, this launch is scheduled for about 4.5, 5 hours from now, and the weather has to be clear around the launch pad for that to happen. And it's right now not clear. It's raining there, and meteorologists are watching the skies, hoping they can find a hole. As you know, there's a very narrow launch window for this mission. But as you say, the astronauts are suited up. They're ready to go. They're ready to climb aboard the shuttle for this launch, which will happen, as we said, less than 5 hours from now. The astronauts spent a couple of hours putting on their spacesuits and eating their traditional departure meal. There's a lot of history tied to this mission. It'll be the 100th time Americans have flown in space and the first international space docking mission in 20 years. The docking, now scheduled for Monday, will be difficult. The shuttle will approach the Russian Mir space station from thousands of miles away, and Commander Hoot Gibson will steer the 100-ton spaceship down a corridor which will only be a few inches wide in the final seconds. Gibson is always hooked up properly in the simulator on the ground, but he's not sure it'll be that easy traveling at 17,000 miles an hour in space. Here's what it's supposed to look like. The Russians provided a docking adapter, and NASA put a target in the middle of the ring for Gibson to steer toward. And that's what he's probably going to be able to do on Monday. Right now, the launch is scheduled for 20:43 GMT, and if the weather in Florida clears up, and sometimes it does, even when the odds for a successful launch are worse than they are right now, they can get it up there.
John, the window, though, is really narrow. Why is it so narrow?
Because the shuttle has to leave the launch pad when the Russian space station is directly overhead. Otherwise, there wouldn't be enough fuel on board the shuttle for the shuttle to catch the space station. And there are 2 opportunities, one to dock on Monday, one to dock on Tuesday, and there are actually 2 about 5-minute windows today that are just combined right at the same time.
CNN's John Holliman, thanks very much.
All right, be back at lunchtime.
And CNN will carry the launch live when it happens. But it's time now for a look at the weather conditions around the world, and for that, here's CNN's Dave Hennon.
Across North America, pretty much the same story as over Europe. A couple areas of low pressure moving slowly, and a buildup of more afternoon showers and thunderstorms expected along the eastern U.S. and into eastern Canada.
You're seeing from live pictures, the shuttle is fueled and scheduled to take off about 4 hours from now, but meteorologists give only a 1 in 5 chance for the weather to be good enough for the launch. The shuttle's mission is to rendezvous and dock with the Russian space station Mir. NASA officials are hoping for a go Saturday for a key international space mission. dressed up and ready to go. Now NASA only wants the skies to clear the way for the Space Shuttle Atlantis. The Space Shuttle Atlantis is still stuck on the ground. Thunderstorms in Florida are again keeping the U.S. spaceship earthbound. As you can see there, they are waiting to be let out because for the second straight day, the joint U.S.-Russian mission has been delayed. Launch officials say they'll try again now on Tuesday. The 7 astronauts and cosmonauts were already aboard Atlantis when the mission was scrubbed and the ship was fueled and ready to go. Lightning struck the launch pad and the rain was heavy, but no damage was done.
Der amerikanischen Raumfähre Atlantis ist am Samstag erneut verschoben worden, und zwar wegen schlechten Wetters. Die 7 Astronauten, unter ihnen auch 2 Russen, hatten die Raumfähre schon bestiegen, als die NASA den Start absagte. Dicke Wolken kündigten ein Gewitter an. Jetzt soll Atlantis wahrscheinlich am Dienstag abheben und 2 russische Kosmonauten zur Weltraumstation Mir bringen. Es wird der 100. Flug einer US-Raumfähre sein. Auf dem Rückflug soll der Shuttle einen US-Astronauten und 2 Russen wieder auf die Erde transportieren.
Atlantis was supposed to blast off on the first U.S. mission in 20 years to dock with the Russian spacecraft. Among the crew of 7 are 2 Russians who will stay aboard the Mir space station. Atlantis will bring home 2 other Russians and U.S. astronaut Norm Thagard from the Russian space station. CNN will cover the launch of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, now set for Tuesday at 3:32 p.m. Eastern.
Hello and welcome. I'm Miles O'Brien. It appears it won't be too long before the Space Shuttle Atlantis and the space station Mir have their close encounter of the orbital kind. The historic docking mission is widely seen as an important milestone on the road toward a new era of cooperation in space. But before that can happen, some complicated machinery has to work and some fancy flying has to go down without a hitch.
Closer together. We are bringing our nations closer together. The next time we approach, we will shake your hand, and together we will lead our world into the next millennium.
The orbiting minuet of Mir and Shuttle puts NASA's best stick and thruster jockeys in the hot seat, where, true to Chuck Yeager form, they remain cool as a cucumber. Atlantis Commander Hoot Gibson has logged more than 200 hours docking with the Russian space station in a NASA simulator. Using laser rangefinders and visual targets as a guide, he must creep down an imaginary funnel, which offers only a 3-inch margin for error in the final 3 feet before capture.
It is a very intensive thing, and it's a process that we've got to do right, or we can physically damage the Mir either by hitting it with our thrusters or by hitting it too hard, hitting it too fast. So we have got to fly it very precisely. I think we're up to it.
Gibson is being humble. NASA says he hasn't missed a single approach in training, excluding those occasions when the simulator conjured up a major malfunction in the docking hardware. This mission to Mir will be as much a test of piloting mettle as it will be of finely engineered metal.
What are we looking at, first of all, here? What is this called? What is the...
Okay, it's called the Androgynous Peripheral Docking Assembly.
Built by the Russians under contract from U.S. shuttle builder Rockwell, the docking mechanism would make a Swiss watchmaker proud. More than 200 gears linked to a network of pulleys, cables, and shock absorbers make it tick. Rockwell engineer Bruce Brandt let us check under the hood, so to speak.
That's the guide ring here.
This is what we call the guide ring.
Prior to docking, the 3-pedaled guide ring extends outward by 11 inches. A set of capture latches on each pedal snaps the ring snugly to the identical docking ring on the Mir. The shock absorbers stop the vehicles from swaying. Once the huge craft are properly aligned, the ring will automatically lock, then slowly retract. When the rings are seated, 12 interlocking hooks will pull the docking devices together, creating an airtight seal.
The crewman then would open up a pressure equalization valve from inside our airlock in the orbiter, which pressurizes this entire volume. And at that time, we're going to open the hatch and be able to go through into the Mir station.
In theory, undocking is much simpler. The hooks are released and springs push the vehicles gently apart. If the hooks get stuck, exploding bolts should save the day.
Not that we want to scare anybody, but this system has never been proven out, never with a vehicle as large as this shuttle.
So Rockwell engineers have run the docking system through thousands of rigorous computer simulations. They are satisfied it will rise to the occasion.
There is a lot of margin for error.
the pilots can actually maneuver the vehicle to much better misalignments than what the system can handle.
The Russians created this docking system to be used on their version of the space shuttle, which flew only one unmanned mission. But the design is a direct outgrowth of the device used to link the Apollo and Soyuz spacecraft in 1975.
Glad to see you.
In the end, that meeting of Russian and American spacecraft was more political achievement than technical triumph. The Cold War adversaries agreed to follow certain design guidelines, but then built and flew their own hardware. The second docking is a different story.
This is a complement of avionics boxes, we call them.
This time around, a U.S. spacecraft is laced with Russian-made equipment. Making all the electronics, connectors, and wiring mesh with space shuttle systems has been a huge engineering challenge.
Just the controlling this configuration with this many wires and the specification required for that was a tremendous job in itself, just to make sure that everything did fit up properly.
Making sure it all fits. That's the goal of this mission in more ways than one. When it's over, these former space rivals should know a lot more about how well their partnership fits. If the latches on that docking mechanism get stuck and the exploding bolts don't do the job, two astronauts are ready to take a walk in space, wrenches in hand, to remove the 96 bolts that hold the docking ring onto the airlock. Even without a spacewalk, NASA knows this is a high-profile, high-interest space shuttle mission. So the agency has created a special place on the World Wide Web where Netsurfers can learn a lot about STS-71, as well as download still and moving pictures. We'll have the address for you a little later in the show, so stay tuned and be ready to jot it down.
NASA will try again to launch the Shuttle Atlantis. Thunderstorms and heavy rains have grounded the spacecraft, but now NASA says there is a 60% chance that the foggy weather will clear. Atlantis is scheduled to deliver 2 Russian cosmonauts to the Mir space station and to bring home 2 cosmonauts and a U.S. astronaut. CNN International will broadcast the launch, if it happens, at 1932 GMT.
The following is CNN's coverage of a live event.
Welcome, this is John Holliman at the CNN Center in Atlanta. After nearly a week of weather delays, the Shuttle Atlantis is on the pad in the final seconds of its countdown with history. Atlantis and its crew of 5 astronauts and 2 cosmonauts will be leaving in just a matter of seconds.
Mission unmatched in space shuttle history.
The goal of this mission will be to dock with Russia's Mir space station, which is orbiting 213 miles above the Earth right now. The Mir is coming up in the vicinity of the Kennedy Space Center, and the shuttle has only 10 minutes to lift off before the Mir gets too far away for an easy rendezvous. We're now at 90 seconds away from liftoff. If the launch happens shortly, the shuttle will dock with the Mir on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. After a couple of hours of testing, the hatch will open, and astronauts and cosmonauts from different spaceships will shake hands in space for the first time in 20 years. The significance of this mission is more than scientific, although its stated purpose is to study the effects of long periods of weightlessness on people. The real story here is the ability of 2 superpowers who were former Cold War enemies to cooperate on a complex, major scientific project. Everybody involved in the project says it's been difficult, with language being the major barrier for the scientists, technicians, and even the astronaut and cosmonaut flight crew members. But it appears to be working today. We're now about 30 or 40 seconds away from launch, and for the last 30 seconds, we'll listen to NASA's mission commentators, George Dillard.
For auto sequence start, Atlantis onboard computers have primary control of all the vehicle's critical functions. T-minus 20. 15. 12. T-minus 10. 9. 8. 7. 6. 5. We have 3 main engines up and running. 2. 1. And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that will herald a new day of international cooperation in space.
Houston now controlling.
Houston, Atlantis is in the roll.
Roger, roll, Atlantis. Atlantis is completing a roll maneuver as the vehicle turns into a heads-down position. On course for a 161 nautical mile orbit and rendezvous with Space Station Mir. Atlantis' three main engines are throttling down now at 68% of rated thrust as the vehicle passes through the area of maximum dynamic pressure. Approaching 1 minute into the flight, the orbiter is downrange from the launch site 3 nautical miles, the altitude already up to 40,000 feet. Atlantis, Houston, go at throttle up.
Roger, go at throttle up.
3 liquid-fueled engines are back at full throttle of 104%. The vehicle's altitude is approaching 70,000 feet, downrange from the launch site 10 nautical miles. Atlantis is already traveling 2,000 miles per hour as the vehicle passes through 1.5 minutes into the flight. The next event is burnout and separation of the twin solid rocket boosters at about the 2-minute 4-second mark of the flight.
The most tense part of any shuttle mission is the first 2 minutes, as Atlantis speeds up to 17,000 miles an hour.
Separation is confirmed aboard the orbiter. Atlantis is downrange from the launch site 32 nautical miles. Altitude is 170,000 feet. Traveling 4,400 feet per second, or about 3,000 miles per hour. Houston, performance nominal.
We copy. Performance is nominal, Kurt.
Atlantis, Houston, 2-engine Baron.
As you saw, those 2 solid rocket boosters were jettisoned at just the right
Performance
moment.
thus far aboard Atlantis has been as expected. The orbiter can reach Morone in Spain in the event of a single engine failure. However, all 3 are still at full throttle, performing in excellent shape. The hydraulic systems aboard the orbiter are also in good shape, as well as the fuel cells providing electrical power to the vehicle. Passing through 3 minutes into the flight, Atlantis is 68 nautical miles from the launch site at an altitude of 260,000 feet, traveling 5,500 feet per second, or 3,700 miles per hour.
Atlantis well on its way into orbit. It'll be there 8 minutes after launch. We're going to take you back now to what happened at 2:32 Eastern Time as the Shuttle Atlantis lifted off the pad at the Kennedy Space Center.
6, 5. We have 3 main engines up and running. 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that will herald a new day of international cooperation in space.
Houston now controlling.
Houston, we got this in the roll.
There you can see it lifting off into space just a couple of minutes ago at 3:32 Eastern Time. The mission will last for 10 days. The shuttle will dock with the Mir at the Russian space station on Thursday morning at about 9 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll have extensive live coverage of that. And now CNN resumes regular programming. Talk back live with Susan Rook for our viewers in the United States. For our international viewers, back to the O.J. Simpson replay show. This is John Holliman, CNN in Atlanta.
This has been a CNN Live event.
6, 5. We have 3 main engines up and running. 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that will herald a new day of international cooperation in space.
Houston now controlling.
Houston, we got this.
The U.S. Space Shuttle Atlantis has taken off from Cape Canaveral with an international crew, 5 Americans and 2 Russians. It's the first mission in the history of space travel in which a U.S. spaceship will dock with a Russian craft. On this mission, the orbiting space station Mir. But bad weather postponed this historic launch twice, and the unreliability of the Cape Canaveral launch site in Florida is now proving to be a growing embarrassment for NASA, the American Space Administration. As our science correspondent Andrew Veach reports, it could jeopardise the successful construction of the world's first international space station, and it's prompted Western companies to look east for rockets to put their satellites into space.
And the crew, of course, being led by Commander Robert Gibson.
Just as the astronauts were boarding Atlantis on Saturday, lightning struck the service tower. The weather at Cape Canaveral is so unpredictable that any shuttle has only a 1 in 3 chance of launching on time. Mir is orbiting at 17,500 miles an hour. The rendezvous has to be calculated precisely, and they'll have to dock time and again because Mir will be the core of the new International Space Station. The weekend's cancelled flights suggest that NASA might not be able to meet the timetable.
The thing the Americans have got to make sure they do is get off on time. If they're going to build a space station with up to 60 launches, those launches have got to go in these 5 to 7 minute windows on the day that they're planned to go. Otherwise, the thing is going to go further and further back down the line.
Space Station Alpha, the size of a football field, will orbit 250 miles above Earth. It will cost around $30 billion, and work is due to start in 1997.
In the meantime, there are going to be more shuttle flights to Mir docking, European crews on Mir later this year, American crews, ladies being on there for 3-month missions and things like that. They're going to learn to work together, as they've got to if they're going to build a space station together.
For once, the Russians may be better placed than the Americans. At least Baikonur in the deserts of Kazakhstan does not suffer tropical storms. But since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has been obliged to rent the space base from Kazakhstan. To solve this problem, the Russians are moving their rockets thousands of miles north to Plesetsk, near Archangel. Most of the Soviet Union's spy satellites were launched from here at Plesetsk. It's still the world's busiest spaceport. They launch whatever the weather, and they're proving to be at least as reliable as American rockets.
By sheer record, if you look at the record, they're as reliable and sometimes more reliable than Western rockets. They have their own quality assurance methods and techniques, and they work. The Russian rockets were always designed for a large production run from the outset. So it was always worthwhile investing in elegant engineering in the motors and in the structures to get the thing right. And therefore, after that, the launches were relatively cheap, something worth remembering also when we're dealing commercially as well.
They're also plentiful. The former military factories in Russia and the Ukraine are turning 150 unwanted SS-19 ballistic missiles into a commercial launcher called Rokhot. And there are 360 spare SS-18s, the world's most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile. This will be the first British-made satellite to be launched from Plesetsk. It's built by the rising star of the British space industry, a laboratory at Surrey University transformed into a business worth up to £10 million a year. The project's engineer is David Montgomery.
So next stop, you take over British Aerospace. Don't think we ever want to be like British Aerospace. We're unique.
The microsatellite has been built for the Chilean Air Force. It contains communication equipment, cameras for imaging, and instruments to measure the shrinking ozone layer.
This is the 5th journey of Chile into space.
Chile's foothold in space is costing a mere £3 million, plus the price of the rocket. Called Farsat Alpha, the plan is to launch it piggyback fashion on a satellite built in the Ukraine. A launch on an American rocket would cost twice as much.
We are discussing with Russians, Ukrainian colleagues, and also the Chinese to provide alternative piggyback launch opportunities. So it's a question of who has rockets going where we want to go at an affordable price.
The launch is due at the beginning of August, provided Russia and the Ukraine can solve a last-minute dispute on how much the Ukraine should pay for using Plesetsk. And far more powerful rockets are now being built. They should be able to launch payloads of 23 tons a time from Plesetsk into the orbit of the International Space Station.
From my point of view, logically, it should all come from Russia. They're building the space station components now. We know they work. They're flying, training men. But obviously, politics will decide how they share out the jobs.
The Russians would be only too happy to provide all the rockets to build the space station. If the Americans don't want that to happen, they may have little option but to move the entire launch site for the shuttle away from Cape Canaveral.
Russian crew is busy conducting experiments aboard the US space shuttle Atlantis. The crew of astronauts and cosmonauts is scheduled to dock with the Russian space station Mir on Thursday morning. It'll be the first link-up in space between US and Russian spacecraft in 20 years. Atlantis blasted off on Tuesday after 4 days of delays due to bad weather. The mission is the United States' 100th manned spaceflight. CNN's John Zarella has more on the US space history.
International cooperation in space.
More than 3 decades and 100 flights ago, Alan Shepard rode into history as the first American in space. But the space program Shepard was a part of is far different than today's.
I think what we're seeing again is not the sense of excitement that we had going to the moon. That has slowed down. Much more rational, controlled research going on than we had in the past.
The rationale in the 60s was driven by nationalism. The early years epitomized high drama, a race to the moon. Would America get there first, or would its arch rival, the Soviet Union? Time has certainly changed the focus. 20 years ago, Americans and Russians exchanged Cold War handshakes during the Apollo Soyuz mission.
Glad to see you.
Now, the Shuttle Atlantis and the Mir space station are about to be joined.
This is the start of working together almost as a team around which 21st century spaceflight will be built. So this is, in a sense, this 100th spaceflight, which is a U.S.-only mission, is the end of one era, and the 101st is the opening of a very different era.
With a U.S. budget-cutting Congress and a Russia strapped for cash, no one is quite certain what the new era in cooperation will bring, or whether historians will look back at this shuttle mission and see it in the same light as Alan Shepard's first flight.
Manned spaceflight has become sort of a routine thing. And so, you know, there isn't that anticipation, that excitement, that fear of the risk associated with it that there used to be.
Roger, roll, Endeavour. With NASA moving toward turning the shuttle program over to a private company and the space station on tenuous ground, whether the U.S. will get to mission 200 is an open question.
It's so important to us that I can't believe that the American public is going to get completely apathetic, and that, you know, the funds for a continued space program, at least to some level, is not going to be sustained. I believe that it will.
But right now, spaceflight may not be as significant a part of human life as it once was. The question is whether humans will have as much of a role in the future of space exploration as they have had in the past. John Zarella, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Atlantis ist unterwegs ins All. Der Start war von Cape Canaveral zweimal wegen schlechten Wetters verschoben worden. Gestern Abend war es dann soweit.
An Bord des Shuttles befinden sich 5 Astronauten und 2 Kosmonauten. In 5 Tagen soll die Raumfähre an die russische Weltraumstation Mir andocken. Damit wäre es nach 20 Jahren das erste Mal, dass sich ein russisches und ein amerikanisches Team im Weltraum treffen. Im Juli 1975 hatten Apollo 18 und Soyuz 19 einander angekoppelt. Nachdem sich das stürmische Wetter über Cape Canaveral gelegt hat, verläuft nun alles nach Plan.
U.S. astronauts and Russian cosmonauts are preparing for a momentous meeting in space on Thursday. The space shuttle Atlantis will dock with the Russian space station Mir at 1300 GMT. The complex maneuver must take place within 2 minutes, and there is little room for error. 2 members of the Atlantis crew will then relieve 2 cosmonauts and 1 astronaut aboard the Russian station. Atlantis was launched from the U.S. Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida, on Tuesday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Daddy. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Daddy. I love you. Happy birthday, Dad. Love you. Happy birthday, Daddy. You're the big 4-0 now. Love you. Happy birthday, Charlie. I love you. Have a good time. We miss you. Yeah. From a distance, the world looks blue and green, and the snow canyons white. And from a distance, the ocean meets the stream, and the eagle takes to fly.
Good morning, Houston, and good morning to my family. Thanks, girls. Thanks, Len. It's a great day to have a birthday in space.
At the top of the space station is the Soyuz capsule.
We have a beautiful picture. We see you zooming in now.
Вы хотите получить наш формат дисплея, да?
Анну 86 включить.
This split-screen view now on the left side showing the extended docking ring above the orbiter docking system, and the right-hand view again showing the centerline camera view from the orbiter docking system as it looks at the blinking lights along the Christelle module's docking port. This is Mission Control Houston as the Shuttle Atlantis and the Mir space station pass across the southern tip of South America. Our first views of the shuttle as taken from the Mir and relayed to the United States.
Houston, we have video from the Mir spacecraft looking at you.
Great, Dave. We copy. Of course, we've got it on our cameras here. We've got the center line up, and that's right. You're not going to have TV for a while, are you?
That's right. We won't have it for a while.
Atlantis is currently passing over Tierra del Fuego and the southern tip of South America.
Наблюдаем вашу картинку. Супер, Хьюстоне.
А когда мы будем отключать 15-23?
U.S. astronaut Norm Thagard is manning the camera here, providing this television view.
Вводим, Геннадий Михайлович.
Вводим.
Да.
Есть.
Принято.
Около ДО. В работе. Разгрузка БСК на формате сближения.
Again, Atlantis will stop at a point 30 feet from the Mir space station for 5 additional minutes of station keeping, at which point Flight Director Bob Castle here in Houston and Russian Flight Director Viktor Blagov in Kaliningrad will take one final assessment of the status of their two vehicles before proceeding on for the docking, which is now less than 15 minutes away.
Yep.
Володь, ты слышишь? Слышу, но очень-очень слабо, далеко.
Atlantis about 2 minutes away from reinitiating its final approach to the Mir space station. Time to docking, less than 7 minutes.
Телевидение закончилось, Михаил? Телевидение у нас не закончилось.
Нет, ребята, идет, и мы его принимаем везде.
Так если же СССР у нас кончился.
Ребята, СССР не кончился.
Набрал в режиме S02, ячейка 2036, единицу.
This picture of the orbiter docking system, it is ready for contact and capture with the Christelle module's docking mechanism.
As we've noted, one of the most complex and historic missions in the history of manned spaceflight takes place this morning. That's the link-up of the Shuttle Atlantis with Russia's Mir space station. The Atlantis, with 5 American astronauts and 2 Russian cosmonauts on board, blasted off on Tuesday.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that...
The Mir, carrying 1 astronaut and 2 cosmonauts, has been orbiting the Earth since mid-March. In just a little over 2 hours from now, Atlantis will initiate docking procedures with Mir, and when that's completed, the 2 spacecraft will be linked for 5 days, while the 3 who have been on the space station since March are tested for the effects of prolonged weightlessness. Former astronaut Mike McCulley is the mission's launch director. Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Good morning, Brian.
Thanks
How
for
are you?
being with us. First of all, what's the significance of today's docking? You've, as someone who's been involved with this for 10 years or so?
I think there's a number of significant pieces to it. It's certainly significant from an international cooperative point of view. It's one of the many steps in building an international space station. It's an interesting evolution personally for the folks on board because they've trained so hard to do something that's complicated and touchy. But the crews are trained, they're excited. I saw both the Russians and the Americans last week in the pre-launch activities, and we're fired up and ready to go do this thing.
This won't be like we saw in Flash Gordon, where the shuttle comes down in a second. I mean, this will be a prolonged procedure. Give us an idea, if you would, of how complicated and the timetable we'll see.
The timetable over the next couple of hours, I don't know exactly what their distance is now, but it's
We're
probably
looking at
down
the
in-
computer
in the-
generated, and we saw Atlantis somewhere over what used to be the Soviet Union.
And the closure rates are in the feet per second sort of rates, very, very slow. And once he gets in close, and by in close I mean within 200 to 300 feet, then he'll be moving in at about 1.2, 1.5 feet per second. Very, very precise, very, very slow, because the parameters are so important to getting it right. He's got to be within the right angle, and he's got to be within the right number of inches. And then as his hoot gets very close, then he'll do one final little thrust.
Who Gibson, the pilot.
Mm-hmm. And the rest of the crew is monitoring the distance is very critical, and you tie that to your closure rate. And so there's folks on the crew who are monitoring what the closure rate is with a laser or radar.
Will all docking action be initiated by Atlantis, and,
Yes.
and Mir will, for all intents and purposes, just
Mir's
remain
passive, and Atlantis is active.
In relation to the kinds of things that NASA has done, we're talking about spacewalks, we're talking about landing on the moon, we're talking about repairing satellites in space. How complicated, how dangerous a procedure is this?
I don't think it's dangerous at all. It's complicated, but it's very complicated in the planning phases and in the training phases. So now all that Hoot and his crew need to do is carry out all these things they've been working on for the last year or so.
This is the first live picture that we're getting from NASA Select. Why don't you take us through what we're looking at?
Well, this is a camera that's in the payload bay of Atlantis, looking straight out, sort of up and away, looking at the docking module on Mir. And I would guess that they're in the 200 to 300 foot range, although I'm not sure right now.
I'm told we're in 250 feet.
Okay, well that makes sense, and I'm glad my estimate was correct.
No, you're dead on it.
The pieces that you see in the upper left, upper right, and lower, and in the bottom center are part of the docking mechanism that's on Atlantis. You can see a Y kind of a device that is Hoot's bullseye, if you will.
And he's got to hit that by how much? How big is his margin for error?
2 degrees in angle, and he needs to get in within about 3 inches.
Ooh.
And you can see as they zoomed in, there's a small hole, and what he's eventually going to do with that little circular hole in the middle of that Y is get that lined up precisely with a target that's on the Mir itself.
And we note that they're doing this while both craft are moving at about 17,000 miles an hour around space. Pretty fascinating stuff. Maybe it is Flash Gordon stuff after all.
Well, it's 5 miles a second. It's pretty interesting to look down.
Mike McCulley, we're going to be spending the morning together. Thanks very much for the primer. We're going to come back in just a moment. Moving up on 23 past the hour. We're back right after this.
Is the Christelle module's docking port, which is the target for Atlantis' docking system.
Mike McCulley, you were just telling me something fascinating about the fact that our worldwide satellite communications basically has all the astronauts and cosmonauts on camera, and it's a big deal in the Soviet Union, right?
Well, it is a big deal. It's a big deal for us, and they don't have quite the coverage that we do, and so part of the timing on this docking, the actual docking time, is tied to their capability to have coverage from the ground, both for telemetry and on how their systems are working, and I think also the video coverage.
So basically, they're going to have to make one more orbit so that they're back in position over the Soviet Union so that their people can fully appreciate it.
When that last shot we saw before showed the pictorial, they were over the former Soviet Union, and it's about an hour and a half to go around the world at that speed you mentioned earlier, 17.5. And so about an hour and a half or so from now in the next orbit is when we'll see the actual docking.
I know you didn't like my use of the word danger before, and so I apologize for it, and I won't use it again. Let me rephrase, though. Is there one phase of today's procedure about which you are most concerned that's going to be most nerve-wracking for you?
The docking module has the docking mechanism, all the little latches and things that are involved in the two pieces on the Mir and the Atlantis that come together must work properly. It's all been checked out on the ground. That's what we do at the Kennedy Space Center, and we have high confidence. But if something goes wrong in the way the mechanisms work, it could force a back off and a relook at it. It might cause some problems. There shouldn't be any real danger in this, though.
So you're not concerned about human error. You're worried about the technology here, somewhat.
If I have to worry, that would be the biggest. Yeah, the humans have trained. Hoot Gibson and his crew are highly skilled. They're all experienced astronauts. They know exactly what they're doing, and and the simulators are very good. They've proven an ability to carry it off, and so it won't be a human mistake today. We might have a hardware problem.
We were listening to NASA Select there. What kind of procedures are they going through right now? I mean, what would they be doing just about an hour and a half in advance as they're lining it up?
They're working very hard and patiently, because patience is very important in flying any spacecraft on orbit, but the shuttle in particular. So that crew is making very, very precise and small adjustments to that path that they're coming from below Mir up to Mir over the next hour and a half. So they're doing very, very fine adjustments to their flight path.
But they are operating on deadline, are they not?
Oh,
Do they not
absolutely.
feel like they're up against a certain timetable and up against a certain pressure?
Well, I don't know what up against is the right word, Brian, but they have a very precise timeline that they're on, and their task is to stay on that timeline. So at a certain time, they need to be at a certain place with a certain closure rate and a certain attitude. And so what he's working on, what that crew is working on, is hitting all those parameters exactly right on, all the way in, because they really need to dock within a 2-minute window.
All right. Well, they're going to spin around the Earth one more time, and so we'll invite you to go up to the green room one more time. You and I will dock back here a little bit later.
Thanks.
Mike, thanks very much. We're going to come on back in just a moment. There's more ahead right after this.
Showing the docking mechanism on the Christelle module. At the top is the Spectre Science module with one of its 2 solar arrays unfurled, the other array clearly shown.
Eileen Collins, as you pointed out, they don't say very much. And we have about another minute here before we have to take a break to let our local cable systems get involved for a moment or two. But we'll continue to look at these live pictures and have our discussion up until we have to take that break. And we'll be back at a couple of minutes before the hour to watch the final docking.
Away from reinitiating its approach to the Mir space station. We should be acquiring a television picture from Atlantis looking at the Mir at 7:57 Central Time, about 2 minutes from now. That picture will remain until 2 minutes after contact at 8:02 a.m. Central Time. Contact expected straight up at 8 a.m.
So what's going to happen in the next couple of minutes is the 2 ships will get closer and closer together. We'll take our break. When we come back, we will probably have a split screen for you. On one side, we'll have the picture from Mir of the shuttle. On the other side, picture of the shuttle from the Mir. So we'll take a little break. Don't go away. We've got some even more exciting stuff to show you when we get back. Stay with CNN and CNN International.
Celebrating a decade of achievement. This is CNN International.
The following is CNN's coverage of a live event.
Welcome, John Holliman at CNN Center in Atlanta. We'll be joined in a moment by Eileen Collins, shuttle pilot, who's with the CNN Science correspondent Miles O'Brien in Houston. But first to the live pictures from space. You can see now a split-screen view as the Shuttle Atlantis and the space station Mir are moments away from docking. It'll happen within the next minute and a half if it is directly on schedule. On the left, you see the Mir space station in the upper left of your screen. At the bottom of your screen, you see the docking adapter on board the shuttle. And on the right, you see the camera that Shuttle Commander Hoot Gibson is looking through as he lines up that docking ring with its opposite part on the Mir, unless I am mistaken. Eileen, Miles, join me here. Correct me if I'm wrong, and we'll just listen in to the final few seconds of this docking.
You are correct about those pictures. Now, I'm curious about the picture on the right, Eileen. Does Hoot Gibson have any sort of crosshairs on his picture so that he can line up crosshairs with the crosshairs on the Mir so that he has a good indication of where he is?
Yes, he does, but he's primarily flying off. If you look at the picture on the right, you see the small black cross in the middle. That is actually a standoff cross. It's standing out by a foot or so he gets depth perception, and he needs to line up those black lines with the outer black lines. And it looks like he's almost right on there. It's very close in the roll, pitch, and yaw axis.
So we might be seeing the crosshairs, it's just that he has it lined up so well we can't necessarily...
He's got them lined up exactly, so we can't see the depth on it right now.
Look at the picture on the left as the two spaceships are inching closer and closer together. We'll actually see the docking, I think, on that picture on the left.
Yeah, he's within a few feet right now. When he gets within about 1 inch, Hoot will press a button to fire the post-contact jets that will make what we call a soft dock. And you may be able to see this in the picture. You might see some rocking. And that should happen momentarily. I might add that the time at 8 o'clock is not quite as important as having the correct closure rate.
Look at that.
Look at that. Here we go.
He's very close now. That's it. Soft docking.
There's sort of shock absorbers down on the shuttle that are taking some of the hit here, right, Eileen?
You're getting a little bit of rotation from the shuttle, and there are some what you could call shock absorbers to dampen that out.
Yeah. I should note we're right on time here. There's some precise timing involved, as we discussed earlier. Plus or minus 2 minutes, and Hoot Gibson nailed it.
I'm very impressed.
Now, explain this free drift, Eileen. They just commanded the shuttle and the Mir to go into this.
Okay, the free drift mode will not allow any jets to automatically fire. At this point, you don't want any jets to fire unless you have commanded it. So, at free drift mode, the only jets that will fire are the ones that Hoot commands specifically or that someone manually commands aboard Mir.
Okay, let's listen in to NASA commentator Rob Navius and the astronauts and cosmonauts for a bit.
Так, телевизию, наверное, можно выключить. Да, тень ходит.
Volodya, захват подтвержден.
Да, Боди, приняли. Захват тоже подтверждаем. Принято на центральном посту.
Commander Vladimir Dezhurov aboard the Mir also confirms capture.
I think you were hearing the Russian version of howdy a few times back and forth there.
Mechanical Systems Officer here reports that the two docking mechanisms are now aligned. The docking ring on Atlantis should be retracted shortly. Once fully retracted, the structural mating of the hooks and latches on both sides of the docking interfaces will be underway.
And that's the picture down into the shuttle from a camera on board the Mir.
This whole process takes about 20 minutes from here, right? Before you actually get a hard dock, Eileen?
Yeah, I think it's about 20 to 30 minutes, I would guess. And it's once that happens, we need to repressurize the docking tunnel before you can open the hatch. So it's going to take a while.
Eileen, explain to me why you have to drive the shuttle. You have to fire thrusters on the bottom sometime in the next 20 minutes to force the shuttle up into the Mir. Why don't they just, now that they're connected, why can't they just latch the latches and say that's that?
Well, I believe that you just need a little extra push is insurance against making sure that you have the contact. You don't want to miss it, because if you miss it and then you try to close the latches, obviously you won't have a good contact there, and you'd have to back away and do it over again. So it's really insurance against making sure that we do have a good, firm contact.
All right, we're going to listen in now live to the conversation as this process takes place.
The docking ring is now slowly retracting. That will bring the two docking interfaces flush against one another. And once that occurs, the relative motion between the two vehicles will be dampened out by shock absorbers in the orbiter docking system, enabling the structural mating of the hooks and latches on either side of that docking interface between the Christelle and Atlantis to begin. That will be about a 3 to 5 minute process. Once the hooks and latches are all hooked up together, then the capture ring will be extended slightly once again to enable the capture latches to be reopened, and the ring will be retracted one more time for final hard mating between the two vehicles.
The docking ring that Rob Navius is talking about is that shiny thing on the left side of your screen near the bottom. It will begin to slowly come down into the shuttle half of the Mir shuttle combination. And as you see, it's pulling the Mir down with it.
The docking ring was designed and built by the Russian firm Energia. It was initially designed for the Russian version of the space shuttle called the Buran, but it never flew or was docked because the Buran only flew one unmanned mission. The docking ring has been used before by the Russians, but never with a vehicle this large, so they really didn't know for sure that it was going to work in this situation. They ran through a lot of simulators. And we're getting a wave there from Hoot. Is that Hoot Gibson there?
Yeah, that's Hoot waving.
Who else is with him there?
And it's tough to tell.
From the Mir space station,
looks like one of the cosmonauts, I think.
Waving out the windows.
Okay, there's the two Russians that we can see right now.
In the window.
In the left window.
Soloviev and Budarin just a few hours away from moving into the Mir space station to take over control of the Mir from their colleagues, Commander Vladimir Dezhurov, Flight Engineer Gennady Strekalov, and cosmonaut researcher Norm Thagard, the first U.S. astronaut to fly on the Mir.
It's a very happy time for them to go back and see their home. I believe that was Commander Gibson and pilot Charlie Precourt in the right window.
Is this the moment where you can relax a little bit finally?
This is the moment where I do know that most of the crew members can relax at this point, but Greg Harbaugh, who's working the docking process, is probably pretty much in concentration right now.
How long will it take before they'll know whether there's a leak in the docking stack? I know they have to do the hard dock first, and then they start doing leak checks. How long will it take?
That's right.
Now reporting that
once we get the hard dock, it's going to take, well, at least, I would imagine, at least a half an hour. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but what we need to do is repressurize that docking tunnel that connects to Mir and make sure that it holds air. If there is any kind of leak, we'll have to troubleshoot it. But with the handshake that should be happening here within the next 2 hours, I'd imagine that it shouldn't take very long.
All right, we're going to continue to listen in.
There are 12 hooks in all, 2 sets of 6 hooks apiece, which will overlap.
Dave, if you're ready, we'll power off the TCS.
GNC concurs. TCS power down.
The TCS is the laser device which allows the pilot of the, or whoever's in command of the shuttle to know the range and rate at which it is closing.
Space station in this picture from the Shuttle Atlantis.
We've got spectacular live TV.
Yeah, you ought to see it from here.
We'd all like to. We're free drifting the right direction to help us with our beta mask. We're extending the TV coverage a bit.
Так, выключаем. Анна 73. ИСА 319 тоже отключаем. Термостат оставляем.
Well, we've lost our live picture temporarily from space. The picture you were looking at there, the last shot that we saw, was the shuttle and the Mir and the docking ring, that sort of dark thing in the middle of the screen, showing that the two ships are as close together as they need to be, certainly, at this time in the mission. And we're gonna take a break, and we'll come back and probably show you a replay of the docking itself. We can get that ready. Stay with CNN for more live coverage.
This has been a CNN Live event.
Will then set out to conduct a series of leaks.
All right, we're back. Welcome back to our viewers at CNN in the United States, CNN International around the world. The shuttle and the Mir are docked. They'll be hard docked in a matter of seconds, and a lot of people are talking to each other in space. We're going to listen.
Mir Commander Vladimir Dezhurov on the Mir side of the docking interface. This will take about an hour to complete. Leak checks will be made to both the docking ports themselves, their respective hatches, the vestibule, the 3-foot-long tunnel in the orbiter docking system, which will be the passageway for the astronauts and cosmonauts over the next 5 days between each other's vehicles. Once that's complete and both sides report good leak checks, then the tunnel will be pressurized for the next 5 days. That will be the final step prior to the initiation and the approval from both flight control teams for the astronauts and cosmonauts to open up their respective hatches. That hatch opening is expected at 10 a.m. Central Time. The initial handshake between Commander Hoot Gibson and Mir 18 Commander Vladimir Dezhurov expected at that point, with live TV from both vehicles anticipated at that point. Shortly after those initial handshakes are completed, Gibson and his crew, including cosmonauts Anatoly Soloviev and Nikolai Budarin, will move into the Christelle module and then eventually into the Mir core module, where cameras will be set up once again for a welcoming ceremony and initial exchange of traditional items such as flowers, fruit, and chocolate from the shuttle crew to the Mir crew, and bread and salt from the Mir crew to the shuttle crew. With the ceremonial activities out of the way, the first order of business on the timeline will be a safety briefing that the 10 cosmonauts and astronauts will offer to each other so that they may understand emergency evacuation procedures from each other's vehicles in the event of a problem, which is not expected. Once that is completed, then Soloviev and Budarin will remove custom-made Soyuz capsule seat liners from an airlock in Atlantis and transfer those seat liners into the Mir space station. That will signify their assumption of command and control over Mir operations, and at which point the Mir 18 crew of Dezhurov, Strekalov, and Thagard will become part of the shuttle crew. Flight controllers here in Houston now checking with Russian flight controllers at the Mission Control Center in Kaliningrad to receive approval to maneuver the docked shuttle Mir configuration into an attitude that will re-enable solar power to pour onto the solar arrays of the Mir space station for electrical production. The shuttle will be...
When the live picture comes back, we will, of course, take you back there to it. Let us once again introduce CNN science reporter Miles O'Brien and astronaut Eileen Collins. The fact is that right now, the Mir and the shuttle Atlantis combination are a couple minutes away from being driven together in the hard docking procedure to be completed. Eileen, if we could get live picture, would we be able to see anything as the shuttle jammed itself up into the Mir, or would it be just the same kind of picture we were just looking at?
Well, John, I'm really not sure about that. In fact, I'm not really sure if the crew knows what they're going to see. Talking to Hoot beforehand, he was thinking that maybe he might see some clicks or some vibrations, but we're not really sure. Like we mentioned before, this is the first time we've had two spacecraft this large dock with each other, so there's a lot of unknowns, and I think we're just going to have to watch and see what happens.
Yeah, Rob Navius, the NASA commentator, was just talking about the fact that the ground controllers in Russia and in the United States are talking to each other. Is that a lot more complicated than it would be for a shuttle mission where you don't have other national people from other countries involved? The communication process, you know.
I would say it's probably twice as complicated because you have twice as many people who are listening, and the major complicating factor is the language. We're trying to learn as much Russian as we can, and the Russians are learning as much English, but yet you have to work many times through translators. And in a case like this where you could have emergencies develop, you need to have a protocol, which we do, ready to go to get immediate communication to both sides. And yes, it does add some complications, and I'd say it's mainly the language.
Yeah, well, everybody I've talked to in the U.S. space program and the Russian space program, including all the Russians who are involved in this mission in space right now, tell me, if only we spoke the same language, it would be so much easier. While we continue our conversation, let us show you some pictures from the past 60 minutes or so. We'll start out when the two spaceships are about 270 feet apart. This is the shuttle, as seen from the mirror when they're that distance apart. And I'll continue to update you on what we're watching. But basically, you'll see the two spaceships get closer and closer together as we continue to talk with each other and listen to NASA commentator Rob Navius and perhaps others on the ground at NASA in Houston and other places as this mission continues. Eileen, you've done a mission close to this, obviously. Let's talk about the emotion of the crew as you're in this situation where you've gotten almost to the peak of the mission here. What's going through the minds, what's going through the hearts of the people on board those two spaceships right now?
Well, I would have to say up until the point of capture, the crew was probably very, very focused on what they were doing, making sure they did everything right. Once capture happens and you realize it, there's a feeling of elation. We did it. We made it. We've been training for such a long time, and it's been successful. And actually, that's the feeling that I had down here, thinking back at the past 3 years that the two countries have been working together, trying to make this happen. It's just a wonderful feeling to see everything come together, especially Russia and the United States, who've many years worked against each other, are now working together for something as wonderful as cooperating in space.
How long have you been in the space program? A couple of years, right?
NASA since 1990, although I had my first flight just about, well, it's 4 or 5 months ago now.
Sure, I remember. You have seen the change in U.S.-Soviet, now U.S.-Russian relations. Did you ever expect to be able to do this, what's going on today, and probably the mission you will be able to fly someday and do your own docking?
Well, let me say that when I applied to NASA, I had no idea that I'd ever be working with the Russians on such a scale. It wasn't until, I'd say, 1992, 1993 that we really started talking about doing this. And as Russia started dropping their barriers and started becoming more open, we realized we can learn a lot from each other by taking our technical programs and our scientific programs and our medical knowledge and sharing it. And by doing it in space, we can add the extra variable of zero gravity to help us learn more than we can here on the surface of the Earth.
I got a live picture of Norm Thagard to show you, Eileen. We'll go up to the one module on the Mir. Norm Thagard, man who's been in space more than 107 days now. His feet are just going out of view on the left. Did not expect to see this picture, but this is on board the Mir, the Russian space station. There's one of his Russian cosmonaut colleagues coming into view right now. Don't exactly know what this is, but I think we probably ought to give it a listen and just see what's going on and see if the hard dock has in fact occurred yet.
Please do delete the DAP inertial and your go for the maneuver on A auto Vern.
Okay, Dave, I copy. You are go for me to maneuver now to IO 101.4, which is the attitude we just did.
Affirmative.
And Dave, I'm standing by to proceed with the pressure checks and hatch opening sequence 2.4, starting with 4.
Norm Thagard's on your left. Vladimir Dezhurov, the commander of the Mir, is in the middle, and Gennady Strekalov on the right. So
this is Mission Control Houston. This live picture being seen inside the Mir space station.
Понял, мы слышим. Мы сейчас будем говорить с руководством НАСА и РК России.
We'd kind of hope to have a translator for this for our viewers who understand English better than Russian. Perhaps we'll get that coming up here shortly.
Пусть подождут, пока ничего не делаем.
And maybe Norm Thagard there on the left will speak a little English for us.
Bonnie, we're about to have a comm with Bonnie. Bonnie. Спасибо, Bonnie.
Руководители, поговорим.
Принято. Принято, Виктор Дмитриевич. Я не ошибся? Вроде голос Благовый.
Тут, понимаете, ребят, какая-то оказалась проблема. Мы сейчас в канале Антареса, а все это руководство, и господин Голдин, и Коптев, они находятся на балконе. И что-то вот трубка это в режиме Антареса не функционирует. Сейчас они спустятся к нам, ну и тут скажут несколько слов.
We expect to hear the voice of astronaut Bonnie Dunbar aboard Atlantis, who was Norm Thagard's backup for this mission. And she may be speaking Russian. Her Russian is probably better than any other American astronaut, with the obvious exception of Norm Thagard, who's been speaking Russian almost constantly.
This is Mission Control Houston, this live television coming from the core module of the Mir space station, showing U.S. astronaut Norm Thagard, Mir 18 Commander Vladimir Dezhurov, and Flight Engineer Gennady Strekalov, as they prepare to accept congratulations from Russian Space Agency Director General Yuri Kopchev and NASA Administrator Daniel Goldin, who are both in the Russian Mission Control Center in Kaliningrad. This being seen just 21 minutes following the successful docking of Atlantis to the Mir.
We'll get a little diplomatic aspect of this great scientific mission now, as the heads of the two space programs call up to the Mir to congratulate everybody.
Норман, оставайся на связи, и вот на этой картинке. Давай.
Володь, я на связи.
Так, Геннадий Михайлович, набираем. S01.
Сейчас, он не на связи.
The hard docking maneuver, where the shuttle was driven forcibly using thrusters into the Mir, has apparently been complete. When we came back a few minutes ago to these pictures, we heard some conversation about a particular procedure. Eileen Collins, if you can jump in here and let me know if you heard what I heard that indicates the hard dock has been completed, that would help our viewers.
Well, it's my understanding, I haven't heard directly yet from NASA, but I assume that the hard dock has been completed because the commander of Atlantis has been given a go to maneuver. Now, you would not maneuver the shuttle unless you did have a good solid hard dock, because keep in mind, they're connected now, so any maneuver that the shuttle makes will also maneuver Mir. So it's my guess that the hard dock has been completed.
Now, the shuttle is going to be doing more work for the Mir than would normally be the case on this trip, as I understand it. The shuttle will be steering the thing, keeping it where it's supposed to be in orbit. Is that because the shuttle, because it is taking away solar panel area from the Mir doesn't have as much power, as much juice as it normally would?
Well, I'm not really sure why we decided to do that, but it was decided pre-flight that the shuttle would primarily do the attitude control. Although Mir can also do attitude control, it is capable of that. I might add that we want to put the whole spaceship in an attitude during the flight where the Mir's solar arrays are facing the sun. And it's very important that we have that because the sun, as it hits the solar panels, will generate electricity for Mir. And Mir does need electricity now, and we're helping them out by using the shuttle to do the maneuvering.
Yeah. Eileen, if you can do this, we're gonna take a fairly wider picture that shows the entire model there on the left of our screen. Just show us what's what in that. Where are they? When we see the astronauts, where are they? And what are the various parts of the Mir?
Okay, let me start with the part of Mir that was first launched. Is the core module up here. It was launched in February of 1986. It's been over 9 years that the Russians have had this station in orbit. Secondly, they launched the Kavant 1 module. The Kavant 2 module, which is right here, was launched third, followed by Christelle, which is where the shuttle will be docking not only on this mission, but on the next 6 missions that we have planned over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
The Spectre launch just happened last month, and Spectre was recently attached. The solar arrays, as you see, will add power for each one of the respective modules. And with the shuttle docked on the what we call the long axis of Mir, we can add better stability to the whole spacecraft overall.
Are there any more
looking
places?
ahead to the
Go,
future-
Mouse, jump in.
Looking ahead to future dockings, one of the issues on the Mir is the power, right? They're sort of having a brownout, so to speak.
Yes.
And in some of the future dockings, there are now 6 more ahead of us. We're going to be bringing up some power arrays, some solar arrays to assist them.
Okay, that's a good question. The next docking mission that's scheduled is in October of this year, and that will again be Atlantis. And what we're going to do is bring up approximately this size, bring up what we call a docking module that will have extra solar arrays on it to add power. And as I mentioned, Mir is 9 years old. It's performing longer than the Russians thought it would, and obviously it's getting old. So we need to continue to upgrade the solar arrays so they can keep the spacecraft up there as long as they possibly can.
How critical is the power problem on Mir right now?
Well, you know, I'm not really sure what the answer to that question is. I do know that they do have smaller margins, or a smaller amount of power that they originally thought they would have. And anticipating future problems, you want to correct for them now. I don't think that Mir is in any danger of totally losing its power, but we're thinking ahead and we're planning for the future.
Now, looking ahead toward what's going to happen in the next few days, we've been talking about the next 6 missions. Let's talk about the next few days. There's a lot of activity that's going to go on between the 2 ships. Equipment going in and out, back and forth, to and fro. A lot of scientific experiments underway. Can you give us just a brief overview of what we can expect?
Okay, well, obviously the main transfer that's going to take place is the crews. We are going to bring back our astronaut Norm Thagard and the 2 cosmonauts who've been up there for 3 months. And we're going to drop off the 2 cosmonauts who launched on shuttle. Will take over Mir. That's the main transfer. The second most important one, I would say, is the scientific experiments that have been aboard Mir with Norm Thagard for the past 3 months, and some things that were on Spectre. Some of these things will be brought back on the shuttle for analysis back on Earth. We're also doing some transfer of equipment. We brought supplies. We brought water. There's going to be a lot of movement back and forth between this docking tunnel over the next 5 days.
In all, they'll be together about 100 hours. It's going to be an interesting 100 hours, and we'll have continuous live coverage from Houston, from space, and from Atlanta. And with that, I kick it back to John.
Miles, Eileen, thanks a lot for your expert commentary. We're not getting any live pictures from space right now, so what we're going to do is conclude this part of our live coverage, but this mission's going to continue for another 7-8 days, and CNN and CNN International will be here to continue to bring you up to date as things change and as we get more pictures from space. John Holliman, CNN reporting.
This has been a CNN Live event.
2 Russen, die mit der Atlantis zur Mir flogen, sollen die Besatzung der Station ablösen.
Okay, that's good news, Hoot. Sorry we took so long getting them to you, but I was a little busy earlier. Beautiful job on the rendezvous.
Astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the Space Shuttle Atlantis and Russian Mir space station have already made history this day by docking the shuttle at the Mir. Well, now they're preparing to go one step further by making physical contact. CNN's Miles O'Brien joins us now live from the Johnson Space Center in Houston with the latest. Hello, Miles.
Hello, Riz. It's less than an hour to go before that historic handshake in space. Crew members aboard the Space Shuttle Atlantis and the space station Mir have all but completed their leak test to make sure there's a nice airtight seal between these 2 huge craft as they orbit above the Earth. You're looking at a live picture right now. This shot comes from the cargo bay of the Space Shuttle Atlantis. You're looking at the Cavant module of the space station Mir, and you're looking right at the spot where those 2 vehicles mated about a little more than an hour ago. Let's watch and listen to the sights and sounds of that historic moment.
2 of those solar panels. Flight controllers here standing by for contact and capture of the 2 vehicles against one another.
Один фут.
Copy. Capture.
Станция перешла в индикаторный режим.
Joining me now live is astronaut Eileen Collins, who knows a lot about the space station Mir. In February, she was the pilot of a space shuttle, which got within 37 feet of the space station as part of the Rendezvous, which was a dress rehearsal for today's docking. Thanks for joining us, Eileen. There's got to be a great sense of relief, not only in orbit, but also on the ground here in Houston.
Oh, that's definitely true. This is historic in the sense that not only is it 20 years since the first docking between an Apollo Soyuz capsule, United States and Russia, but it's also the culmination of 3 years of work between the two countries in making all this happen. And my mission was just one event in that process to make sure that today's event would be successful, and it is, and we're just very happy about it here at NASA.
Now, there was a handshake in space between Americans and Russians almost exactly 20 years ago,
That's
the
right.
Apollo Soyuz mission. How does that mission differ from this mission today?
Well, I would say, you know, the world was different 20 years ago, and it was important to us to join with the Russians and work in space. But after the Apollo Soyuz mission in 1975, we did not continue. What's different now is this is the first of 7 docking missions that we'll have over the next 2.5 years. And I would say that we're on a roll right now. This is the beginning, and I think that I'm very optimistic, and I know NASA and the Russian Space Agency is very optimistic that we can continue to work together to make the space program in both countries better.
Now, the two craft, these 2 250,000-pound craft, will be joined together for about 100 hours, nearly 5 days. A busy time on both craft?
Well, definitely, it's going to be busy. Time in space is precious, and time in space is expensive. And we want to make sure that we can get the most of what we can out of this. Primarily, we're going to be doing the crew exchange, as we talked about earlier. We'll be doing equipment exchange, supplies. We'll be exchanging water. And it'll be a time for us to take a look at our scientific experiments and make sure that they are completed, and we can bring them back and analyze them after the flight.
This mission is a little bit about science, but a lot about just building trust and proving some basic concepts. If the idea is to build a space station together, Russians and Americans, these kinds of things have to be routine, don't they?
Well, that's right, and the space station is the next step. After we complete our 7 docking missions, we plan on building an international space station with the Russians and with the Europeans, the Japanese, the Canadians, and it will truly be an international space station. We hope to start launching those pieces in late 1997 or early 1998, and what we're doing here is proof that we can, in fact, work together in space, do it safely and successfully.
All right, thank you very much, astronaut Eileen Collins. That hatch opening and the ceremonies which will follow, which will include an exchange of gifts and an exchange of a few words between both crews, will happen in a little less than an hour, about 45 minutes, and stay with CNN. We'll have coverage for you as it happens. Riz?
Miles, thanks very much. Yes, do stay tuned.
The following is CNN's coverage of a live event.
History is being made 200 miles above the surface of the Earth in the now docked Atlantis-Mir combination. We're going to take you there now, where a live picture is coming down to Earth showing the hatch between the 2 vehicles, which is about to be opened. NASA and Russian Space Agency officials say that hatch will be opened in about 90 seconds from now, and we will watch as it happens. This is Shuttle Commander Hoot Gibson holding a microphone on the Atlantis side of the combined spaceship. Let's listen to what he has to say. He's turning the knobs, the control handles on the hatch. About to open that hatch and make history. It's been 20 years since Russians and Americans in their own spaceships docked in space and said hello. Here comes the hatch.
A lot easier without gravity.
At the other end of that tunnel, the Russian space station Mir.
вторую, да, где-то на трансформатор поставь сюда, пока пустая, да. Теперь смотри, ага, эту руку вторую, да, где-то на трансформатор поставь сюда, пока пустая, да. Ага, 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 ага,
A lot of bright lights in that tunnel, probably for the purposes of these television pictures that we're seeing. And you can see at the far end of the tunnel, top of your screen in the middle, the Russian cosmonauts and astronaut Norm Thagard. Here they come. That's history, ladies and gentlemen. A handshake in space between a Russian commander and an American commander. Vladimir Dezhurov on the Russian side at the top of your screen. Norm Thagard at the bottom of your screen. I'm sorry, not Norm Thagard. Hoot Gibson, the shuttle commander, at the bottom of your screen. Thagard's back there in the far end of the picture in the background. He'll be showing up momentarily.
Вы снимаете там, как все они туда проходят.
Ты продолжаешь снимать, а мы проходим туда дальше. И потом самый последний уходит, и камеру выключается.
Володь, давай.
Нет, ты стой на месте, а мы рядом с тобой пройдем.
We've been asked by our viewers from time to time what language they speak, and often they speak a translated English to Russian, but most of what we've been hearing from the microphone that's open out there is Russian.
Мы в вашем блоке все сделаем. He wants to do everything in a base block. Okay, yeah, well, we were going to bring our cameras and all that stuff into the base block. Okay. Well, it isn't already.
I can hear Norm Thagard, the American who's been aboard the Mir, talking about moving some cameras around. One thing that will happen in the next couple of minutes is some of the cameras that are on board the space shuttle will be taken back into the Mir.
Space Station.
Well, you can see Flight Engineer Greg Harbaugh doing that now. When the TV cameras get moved from one ship to the other, we'll probably lose our picture for a couple of minutes. While this is happening, let me invite my colleague Miles O'Brien, CNN science reporter, to join us from Houston, along with astronaut Eileen Collins. Eileen, let me go to you first, if I may. What are you feeling? How do you like these pictures?
Well, in a little ways, it's taken me back home, just watching how the astronauts maneuver in space. But right now, I'm feeling very good, very happy. I know that these crews have trained together for over a year, and now they're getting to see each other again in space after this long anticipation.
They almost seem like excited tourists.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a good way to describe it? Everybody's got cameras all over the place,
Oh, yeah.
a lot of smiles.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is the kind of thing you want to document for the future. I mean, this is history being made right now. And, you know, I can just, you know, sense with them what they're feeling right now, how happy they are. Again, not just to see their co-workers and their friends, but to have accomplished such a successful mission up to this point.
This was a tricky mission, and they all made it look very routine, didn't they?
Well, yeah, I would have to say it went pretty flawless. And not only did it look routine, but it looked easy. And I can tell you right now that it was not easy. It was a lot of hard work to get where they are right now.
Eileen, what are all these white cables? Looks like we're in the inside of a spaghetti factory gone wild here.
Well, my guess right now, I'm not sure what they all are, but I would guess that they're just camera cables from the camcorders, the handheld camcorders in the pictures that we're getting downlinked right now.
Okay. This is something. It must be quite a moment for those people. Is 10 people together in space a record?
That's a good question.
I think it is.
Off the top of my head, I would have to say yes. I don't think we've ever had, Apollo-Soyuz had 5 total, 3 Americans and 2 Russians, and I don't think we've ever had this many together in space.
I think on Mir, for short periods of time, they've had 6 or maybe 7 cosmonauts, so yeah, I believe this probably is a record.
Is this a view from the Mir side or from the shuttle side? Looks like the Mir side, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. That does not look like the shuttle. I would hope to see this as a sign of the future, that we do have crews this large in space and even more people in the future, and someday we'll be able to fly more and more astronauts and cosmonauts with broader backgrounds.
You know, Mir kind of looks cluttered, doesn't it? There's an awful lot of cables and ductwork, and sort of has an ad hoc look to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I would have to admit, you know, Mir has been up there 9 years, and they are doing quite a bit of science on Mir, and they want to take advantage of every bit of space that they have, and because of that, they're going to cram in as much as they can. The key thing is you need to remember where everything is. You don't want to lose it, and you don't want to mix up any of your equipment.
I did some air conditioning work in my attic a couple summers ago, Miles, and that's what it looks like. These plastic pipes, you know, going everywhere. All right, looks like we've lost her. Nope, no, it's back. There's Hoot Gibson and Vladimir Dezhurov.
Well, no, this is in stark contrast to the designs you see for the International Space Station, which is very sleek and designed in such a way that it'd be very modular, and a lot of the ductwork and wiring would be transparent to the astronauts and cosmonauts who are on board. So I guess the idea is to reduce the amount of on-orbit maintenance, right? So you can conduct your scientific mission?
And another good thing about working with the Russians right now, along the lines of what you're saying, is that we can learn from the Russians and what they've done on their space station, problems they've had, things that have worked, and we can learn from them what has worked well. We'll use that. What hasn't worked well, we'll try to design it better. So we have learned from them.
Using the model here, tell people where we are right now, so they get a sense of where we are in the Mir, right?
In the Mir station, as you can see,
put that up here.
We are docked right now.
Yes, maintain the docking.
As you cross through the docking tunnel here, you will enter the what's called the Christelle module, which is one of the later modules that's been added to Mir. And from there you can cross into the core module, or Spectre, or Cavant 2. I believe these pictures are probably being taken from Christelle right now, although they will be moving throughout the space station.
Now, compared to the internal volume of the Mir, it's a lot more space than a shuttle astronaut is used to, right?
That's right. The space shuttle, primarily the astronauts live in the front portion, in the flight deck and the mid deck. This mission has a module in the back called a space lab, which adds extra experiment space. But for the most part, a space station will just multiply over and over again the amount of space you have on a shuttle, which is why we want to build a space station, international space station, with the United States and our international partners.
I mean, do you know offhand how much, by way of comparison, how much more space there is on the Mir compared to the shuttle?
I can only guess how much more space. I do know that the shuttle weighs about 100 tons, and the Mir is just a little bit greater than that. So the weights are about the same. But when you look at the shuttle, humans cannot live, for the most part, in this portion of the shuttle, where we can live in the vast majority of the volume of Mir. So there is quite a bit more space.
You get a sense here of, and I'm sure it's just a historical fluke or coincidence, on how the two programs complement each other. The Russians took a turn for space station and built this space station. We took a turn and built a space truck, so to speak.
That's right.
Truck and space station are meeting, and the two, in many ways, complement each other, don't they?
That's right. You might wonder how the Russians get back and forth to their space station, and what they have is this, what we could call a capsule at the top. It's called a Soyuz Capsule, very similar to what we used in the Apollo program back during the moon landings. And the cosmonauts are launched on Soyuz, they re-enter on Soyuz. They don't land like a shuttle. The shuttle, as you know, lands like an airplane. The Soyuz actually has a parachute come out, and they do what's called a soft landing on the ground. And that's why they have seats that are specifically made for the cosmonauts, form fit to their bodies, so they don't get injured on the landing. The programs are quite different, although I do see us, our differences complement each other, and the things that we have in common, I think, are in common just because of the pure necessity of spaceflight.
The things that are going on right now aboard the Mir, I guess all the pictures that we're seeing from space are from the Mir, and it appears that the Russian commander, Vladimir Dezhurov, is showing Hoot Gibson around his space station. And because you see Dezhurov and you see Gibson together there, and there's somebody behind him carrying a camera. Ellen Baker, who's the medical doctor who came up on the shuttle, was her main job at this part of the mission was to be the photographic officer, so she may be running that camera. But you can see the cosmonauts are very happy to show off their digs to the first American since Norm Thagard to come up there in history of the Mir space station. But this is kind of an interesting shot. This is at the end of one of the modules. I think this is probably where Norm Thagard got some congratulations from the administrator of NASA, Daniel Golden, a little while ago, which we were able to hear about here on CNN in our coverage.
You know, picking up on the point that Eileen was making about the Soyuz capsule, that the shuttle offers the Russians an opportunity to bring a lot of equipment off of the Mir, which is stuck there, right? Because they don't have the capability of bringing as much equipment back as we do with the shuttle, right?
That's right. Although they do have a Progress spacecraft, which looks like the Soyuz, but only has the capability to go up. On re-entry, the Progress vehicle will burn up in the atmosphere. So using the shuttle to help out the Mir cosmonauts and to help out Russia really has been enhancing their program.
Hoot Gibson has the microphone, the air-to-ground microphone in his hand for the shuttle's radio system. I don't know if he's going to say anything on the radio or to us down here, but if he does, we'll probably interrupt whatever else we're talking about to come back here to it. It appears that everybody's there. There's Bonnie Dunbar. And she's reaching across to shake hands with the Russian cosmonauts. All of these people, of course, are friends. This is not the first time they met. They have been training together for a couple of years. Bonnie Dunbar has spent most of the past couple of years in Russia, learning the language, learning the Russian system.
By Gennady Strekalov for Bonnie Dunbar. The two trained together in Star City for a year for the Mir 18 launch. Dunbar is the backup to Norm Thagard.
That's the voice of NASA mission commentator Rob Navius. It's a nice little welcome aboard ceremony, it appears. We'll be seeing more of the astronauts as they go into the more roomy Mir space station.
Now, there's quite a bit of ceremony involved in all of this, as you know, John. Hoot Gibson will be presenting to the Mir crew flowers, fruit, and chocolate. And Vladimir, going to mispronounce his name, Durajov, will be presenting
being taken and
the Mir 19 crew with bread and salt.
Entrance by Atlantis' crew into the Mir space station. All of the crew members will be positioned shortly to begin a brief welcoming ceremony.
Got to have everybody lined up, I guess, by height for the class picture here as they get together. Yeah, the guys on Mir haven't had Florida grapefruit and Florida oranges fresh in a while. They'll get some in the next hour or two because that's the fresh fruit that the astronauts are bringing.
Copy, we have you loud and clear, and we have a great image inside the Mir space station.
That's astronaut Dave Wolf, the Capcom, who was just talking to Gibson.
It's a great image from here too, Dave. This is quite a view and quite an experience. A wonderful culmination to an awful lot of work on a lot of people's parts.
Hoot Gibson said he was going to practice the words that he said in this ceremony, practice to make sure he said just the right thing.
The rest of the crew members now congregating.
We concur, and it looks like you're all thoroughly enjoying yourself.
We're just having no fun at all.
I think Mr. Gibson may not be telling the whole truth.
I think we have a lot of work and a lot of science for the rest of this mission.
Now, Norm Thagard is on the front row, and he's almost hidden by the flight engineer of the Mir, but you'll see him second from the left on the front row, maybe in a minute.
Attention, please. We are attention for a second. Stop.
Dave, I don't know if you heard Gennady, but Gennady said the first part of the adventure is over, and we're waiting for the second part, which is the landing. I guess in actuality there will be many, many, many second parts.
Copy that loud and clear, Hoot. We have a long history in front of us and a lot of accomplishments to make.
Gennady Strekalov in the green vest on the front row, now second or third on the front row, if you can see him. He's a humorist. He has a very affable fellow, tells a lot of funny stories. No, I think we may be waiting for Ellen Baker to get in the picture so that we can do this photo opportunity.
For the first time in spaceflight history, there were 3 commanders aboard one spacecraft. Anatoly Soloviev, the Mir 19 commander on the left.
More room now than we had with Apollo Soyuz.
That's for sure, Dave. We had kind of tight quarters right at the actual contact point, but as you can see, we have a whole lot more room here in the base block.
The Apollo Soyuz mission was consummated July 17th, 1975, when astronauts and cosmonauts first, and the only other time they have shaken hands in space.
You know, John, that's a famous docking in more ways than one. In many ways, the Russians felt that the docking at that time was a little bit harder than they liked. It was a bit of a jolt.
Continue to capture the historic moment of 10 crew members aboard the Mir space station. Commander Anatoly Soloviev, the Mir 19 commander, was on the left. Atlantis commander Hoot Gibson on the right. Mir 18 commander Vladimir Dezhurov is out of camera range at the moment.
Dave, we're just wondering how much time do we have television, because we do want to stick our sticker to the wall here somewhere.
13 more minutes of television coverage.
Well, that tells us all something, doesn't it?
Okay, thank you. We're still trying to convince Ellen to get into the picture here, and we're about to fasten the camera down and get her to take part in this, too.
Copy.
Ellen Baker, the medical doctor, you can see much of her on the left half of your screen right now as they try to get her on television, is going to be conducting medical tests on Norm Thagard and the 2 long-duration Russian cosmonauts starting in the next couple of hours after these opening ceremonies and a safety briefing on how do we get out of here if something goes wrong. There's Ellen Baker walking toward the rest of her colleagues across the deck of the Mir. And as soon as she gets there, we'll be able to hear this ceremony.
I think the camera to cosmonaut and astronaut ratio is about 1 to 1.
Yeah. Maybe more than that, Miles. There may be more cameras than astronauts. If you count the TV.
Now, you know, going back to that, the Apollo Soyuz mission, the Russians have long sort of jokingly kidded NASA about the hard dock that occurred there. It was a little faster than they thought. I think it's safe to say that this was not a hard dock in that sense, Eileen. It seemed like it was a rather gentle maneuver.
Yeah, from what we were looking at here, it looked like Hoot was right on the closure rate of 0.1 feet per second at the point of capture. And as far as his left, right, up, down, fore, aft alignment, he was right on. And he did an absolutely wonderful job. We're real proud of him.
Eileen, what does this mean? Go out with me 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. The fact that this has worked so well so far, what does that tell you, somebody who works for the U.S. space program, about how it's going to be in the future?
Well, without a doubt, I'd have to say that this shows that when you work really hard and you set your mind to do something and you work together as a team, you can accomplish anything. This was no small task. This took at least 3 years of hard work on both sides.
We're looking forward to that.
It's just I mean, this is an opening ceremony in more ways than one. It's the first flight of 7 docking missions, and I think they're all just going to go great if everything is indicator as what we've had today.
We're all fine down here, and we're sure looking forward to your return to Earth. And hello from all your friends in the United States. Just great to see you again. You look great.
Well, thanks a lot. Now, I understand that you're interested now in signing up for the program. Is that right?
It looks like a great program to be a part of. We all feel a part of it down here, in fact.
It is. You're missing all the fun.
Norm Thagard telling his colleague Dave Wolf he's missing all the fun.
Well, yeah, I am, but I must say I've got mixed emotions. On the one hand, you want to come home, and on the other hand, you think, well, I'd like to do this for just a little while longer.
We understand.
Norm Thagard has served as scientist and guinea pig on this mission.
It's good to talk with you, and it'll be good to see everybody when we land.
You can
That's
see
great.
Norm.
It'll be another great welcoming ceremony then.
On the left side of your screen on the front row.
Dave, we were wondering if maybe you might be able to count heads at this point and see if we've got everybody here. We think we have everybody here.
Well, that's a lot of people in space at one time. We'll count it up.
Shuttle crew members are wearing red, and the Mir crew members are wearing blue right now.
We count 10 people in view.
If there's anybody else there, he or she is a stowaway.
All present and accounted for.
Big wave.
Hello, everybody's waving back.
That's great, Darby.
I think they'll start their ceremony probably any second, and we'll just listen in for a bit and see if that happens.
Their families are all waving from the viewing room.
Mir commander now about to begin the ceremony.
Мы рады приветствовать на борту экипаж STS-71. Такого количества космонавтов и астронавтов на борту еще орбитального комплекса «Мир» никогда не было. Так что мы очень рады видеть их. Эта стыковка и этот полет будет не просто обыкновенной стыковкой. Это еще будет одним политическим, наверное, шагом к сплочению наших народов России и Америки. Очень приятно наблюдать здоровых, очень жизнерадостных людей на станции. И я думаю, что у нас работа состоится, и мы ее выполним очень хорошо и в полном объеме. Спасибо.
Спасибо. Спасибо, Володя. Сколько лет, сколько зим. Сегодня мы, наконец, пожидаем нашу дружбу после полета Союза Аполло. Вместе мы построим будущее на основе сотрудничества, доверия и дружбы. Сегодня это наша важная настоящая миссия. Спасибо. Dave, we have maybe about one thing left, and that's to see if they're going to let us, if we can plant our sticker somewhere here. We may not be allowed to, but we're going to take a look and see if we can put our sticker up.
There's a distinctive
Copy.
sticker.
We have 6 more minutes until Tidra's handover.
For the Atlantis Mir mission. It's in English and Russian. And let's just see. The opening ceremony, as you heard, was in Russian. My Russian is horrible, but I heard about cooperation between the NASA engineers and the Energia, the Russian Space Agency engineers, and about the astronauts and the cosmonauts.
Dave, we're going to shift our TV camera a little bit here to catch Dr. Dunbar applying the sticker to the wall of the Mir.
Copy, we're watching.
Bonnie Dunbar, a geologist, an astronaut, a former CNN astronaut commentator, and a happy astronaut at this moment, I would bet. There's she's peeling the backing off of the mission sticker. Uh-oh, something happened to our television. Let's hope it comes back before the sticking of the sticker.
Dave, we're pulling a battery swap.
You know how it is when you're making home movies of your kids? You know the battery's going to die right when you're doing the important thing. That's what just happened. They're going to put a new battery in their handy cam, and perhaps it'll come back up in a second. While they do that, let's take a quick break. CNN and CNN International coverage of this mission. Nope, there we go. We're back to the live picture. Let's go and stick with it for just a second or two more and see if we can see what's going to happen next.
We see you too.
Okay. Bonnie Dunbar, Colorado native, and as you can see, a smiling, happy astronaut at this moment.
Okay, we have a great image of the joint patch from the U.S.-Russian space program. Hoot, we'd all like to tell you how inspiring it was to watch our country's two great spacecraft dock together out there, and it's just they're beautiful spacecraft.
Astronaut Dave Wolf, the capsule communicator for this mission. Here's Norm Thagard.
Dave, we agree.
Gibson?
This was a pretty spectacular day for all of us, and it was a real thrill for us to get to see the Mir floating freely out there as it has done for so many years now. And after all the training and the preparation, it seems hard to believe that we're actually there, but indeed we are.
This is Mission Control Houston. In their comments to one another, Commanders Vladimir Dezhurov and Hoot Gibson exchanged greetings. Dezhurov indicating that the docking of Atlantis to Mir earlier this morning was another step for the United States and Russia on the road to joint cooperation in space. Dezhurov saying we will cooperate very successfully in the future.
We have 2.5 minutes left on the west satellite.
Fluorescent lighting aboard the Mir.
We're signing the sticker now, Dave, that Bonnie just put up.
Gibson replied that it's been a long time. Gibson replied that it's been a long time since Apollo Soyuz, the first docking between international spacecraft 20 years ago. Gibson said we will build cooperation based on friendship into the future, and this is a very important step along the way.
Thank goodness my friend Rob Navius was able to translate the Russian.
Handshake in space between.
We were planning on just putting our sticker up there, but they'd like signatures along with it, so we're defacing all their hardware and writing our signatures up there.
Just like a bunch of astronauts. Well, this mission is going to continue until the 7th of July for the American astronauts. They'll stay docked to the Mir until the 4th of July. And we're now joined on the telephone from Moscow, or the Russian Mission Control Center, by NASA Administrator Daniel Golden. Mr. Golden, we've been talking about this day in anticipation, you and I, for a long, long time. It is here. How are you doing?
I want to tell you, I'm looking at a TV, and I'm seeing 4 cosmonauts and 6 astronauts in space. And this is the achievement of a dream. And I'm so proud of the NASA team. I have such respect for our Russian friends. This is a wonderful mission.
Tell me what it was like in Mission Control in Moscow. We didn't see any pictures there. We saw pictures in Houston, of course, when the docking was confirmed to be complete.
The first thing I did was hug Yuri Kopchev. And he hugged me, but Yuri's a big man. He weighs about 300 pounds. His hug was pretty good.
Has anything cropped up in the nature of a problem? We have heard nothing about anything going wrong. It all just seems to be going picture perfect from what we can tell. Is that the impression you get from there as well?
Fresh flowers, fruit, and chocolate.
That's correct. But you know, John, when you go to the space frontier, you never know what's going to happen. And right now, it's going very, very well. And I think this is testimony to the long work and the hard hours and Russians flying to America, Americans flying to Russia, and really trying to understand how to do this right.
Well, it certainly appears to be going right. Daniel Golden, Administrator of NASA, thank you very much for taking time out of this important day in your career and your personal life to chat with us. Also, we'd like to thank CNN Science correspondent Miles O'Brien with astronaut Eileen Collins in Houston, who've been providing commentary all day. We may hear from the two of you again before it's over with. And to our viewers on CNN and CNN International around the world, thank you for joining us today for this live event coverage from CNN. Coming up, we're going to have Mary Tillotson with CNN and Company continuing on CNN, and CNN International will have more international news for you. I'm John Holliman. Thanks for being here.
This has been a CNN Live event.
Hello and welcome. The last time they met like this, it was 20 years ago, and the Earth was a much different place. And now Russians and Americans have once again joined their spacecraft in orbit. And there are high hopes for many more meetings in the future. CNN's Miles O'Brien is at the Johnson Space Center with more details. Hello, Miles.
Hello, Riz. The hatch is open, the formalities are over, and now the real work begins. Right now, the crews of the Space Station Mir and the Space Shuttle Atlantis are each giving the other a safety briefing on their respective craft, and then they will soon begin the process of transferring equipment to and fro on the vehicles. The vehicles combined now make the largest satellite ever to orbit the Earth. And the docking occurred a little more than 2 hours ago, the handshake about an hour ago. And let's take a look at the sights and sounds of that historic occasion.
You guys are upside down. Эту руку вторую, да, где-то на трансокатах, да, подопытная, да. А вот этой вот диафрагму, вот этой рукой, вот диафрагму здесь, да. Вот здесь. Да, обрати ее, ты увидишь, вот здесь. Ага, да. Все нормально? Да, да. Welcome to the space.
This was the spectacular scene earlier as the Space Shuttle Atlantis, commanded by Hoot Gibson, inched slowly, ever so slowly, a tenth of an inch per second toward the space station Mir. It was exactly as it had been planned. He flew down a very narrow cylindrical cone, which at its end gave him only about 3 inches margin for error. And by all accounts and by what we can see from the ground here, he simply nailed that approach and initiated a successful docking, which was a soft and safe docking. It's an important milestone in the history of space, and as we look forward to building the International Space Station, which both NASA and the Russian space program are endeavoring to do, this is an important milestone because dockings like this have to occur if you're going to build something that large in space. Joining me live here in Houston is astronaut Eileen Collins, who flew on a shuttle mission in February, which got as close as 37 feet to the Mir. They took a peek at the Mir, and a grand and beautiful craft she is. What are your thoughts today as you see this docking, a successful docking? It's got to be a good day for everyone here at NASA.
Well, it's a great day for us. We're all elated here. Things have gone just wonderful up to this point. I'm not going to say it was luck. It's a result of a lot of hard work from people in Russia and the United States who've worked together over the past 3 years.
Hoot Gibson is known as one of the best pilots there is, and that's probably why he got this mission.
That's right.
I guess it doesn't surprise you to see he made a successful docking with such ease, apparently.
Right. Well, my personal feeling is Hoot is probably one of the best pilots in the world, and he didn't surprise me at all. He was right on.
Well, in the end, what will this mission have proven, do you think?
Well, I think obviously this mission proves that the United States and Russia, two of the largest countries in the world, can work together in a highly technical enterprise such as space exploration and bring our programs together. In the two programs separately were good, but together we can make them better.
This is the first of 7 total dockings between the shuttle and Mir, and there will be a series of activities which will go on during these dockings to bring solar arrays, equipment will go back and forth, crew members will go back and forth. Let's talk about the near term, though. What's going to happen in the next few days as these two craft are joined? A lot of things are going to be going on. It's going to be a busy place.
Right. Well, I think the transfer is probably the biggest thing that will be taking place. Not only the 2 cosmonauts and 1 astronaut from Mir will become part of the shuttle crew, and the 2 cosmonauts that launched on the shuttle will become the Mir crew. But the other thing that will take place is the scientific experiments that have flown over the past 3 months and longer will be taken from Mir into the shuttle and brought back to the United States for our scientists to analyze. And that's probably one of the most important parts of the mission.
Important, and yet, in retrospect, when the milestone is judged, I'm sure it will be judged on other criteria.
Well, that's true.
Thank you very much for joining us, Eileen Collins. Riz, we will continue to be monitoring the events in space. The safety briefing is underway. We've got 5 days of activities as Atlantis and Mir are joined on a very historical mission.
Miles, thanks very much. CNN's Miles O'Brien joined us from Texas there at the Johnson Space Center.
Es ist das zweite russisch-amerikanische Rendezvous im All seit fast 20 Jahren. Nach einem Präzisionsmanöver bei 28.000 Stundenkilometern hat die amerikanische Raumfähre Atlantis an die russische Raumstation Mir angedockt. Die beiden 100 Tonnen schweren Kolosse trafen sich wie geplant um exakt 15 Uhr mitteleuropäischer Zeit. Kommandant Robert Gibson hatte aus 1,6 Metern Entfernung von der Mir die Handsteuerung des Shuttles übernommen. Das Manöver war kompliziert. Es gibt zu dieser schwierigen Andock-Operation kein vergleichbares Beispiel in der Raumfahrtgeschichte. Nur kurze Zeit nach dem Andocken wurden die Verbindungsklappen zum ersten persönlichen Zusammentreffen der Astronauten geöffnet. 5 Tage lang bleiben die Atlantis und die Mir zusammengekoppelt. 2 Kosmonauten aus der Raumfähre werden in der Mir bleiben. Die derzeitige Crew hingegen tritt dann die Rückreise zur Erde an.
Atlantis hat an die russische Raumstation Mir angedockt. An Bord der Atlantis befinden sich jetzt 5 Astronauten und 2 Kosmonauten.
Um exakt 15 Uhr unserer Zeit war es soweit. Das erste amerikanisch-russische Weltraumtreffen seit 20 Jahren. 1975 war es die Ankoppelung von Apollo und Soyuz, die ein neues Zeitalter der Raumfahrt einläutete. Die Andockringe von Atlantis und Mir schlossen sich in einer Höhe von 400 Kilometern über der Erde. Und das bei einer Geschwindigkeit von 28.000 Stundenkilometern. Ein Präzisionsmanöver der beiden 100 Tonnen schweren Kolosse. Denn beim Andocken gab es nur sehr wenig Spielraum. Eine Abweichung von 7,5 Zentimetern hätte das Unternehmen bereits scheitern lassen. Der jetzige Flug war die gelungene Generalprobe für das Zusammenwachsen der beiden weltgrößten Raumfahrtorganisationen. 8 weitere Missionen dieser Art sollen bis Mitte 1997 durchgeführt werden. Die russischen Kosmonauten an Bord der Atlantis lösen 2 Landsleute und einen Amerikaner in der Mir ab. Sie befinden sich bereits seit dem 14. März im All.
Pünktlich um 15 Uhr glückte eine der spektakulärsten Missionen in der Geschichte der Raumfahrt. Die US-Raumfähre Atlantis dockte an die russische Raumfähre Mir an. Über das Rendezvous in 395 Kilometer Höhe berichtet Rainer Munz.
2 Stunden nach dem Andocken war es soweit. Die gemischt russisch-amerikanische Besatzung der Raumfähre Atlantis krabbelte in die Mir. Dort wurde es dann ziemlich eng, als alle zum Gruppenfoto vereint waren. Die letzten Minuten des Ankopplungsmanövers. Kurz vor 15 Uhr steuerten die beiden 100 Tonnen schweren Kolosse aufeinander zu. In der Atlantis ging der Kommandant auf Handsteuerung. So musste er den Shuttle bis auf 7,5 cm an die Mir annähern, damit der Kopplungsprozess einsetzte. Alles klappte reibungslos. Schon einmal, 1975, trafen sich Amerikaner und Russen zu einem Rendezvous im Weltall. Damals dockte Apollo an Soyuz an. Aber für lange Zeit war das die letzte Kooperation. Das 100 Stunden lange Treffen jetzt ist der Auftakt für eine langfristige Zusammenarbeit von Russen und Amerikanern. Ziel ist der Bau einer internationalen Raumstation, die Mitte 2002 fertig sein soll.
Die US-Raumfähre Atlantis koppelte planmäßig Punkt 15 Uhr an die russische Weltraumstation Mir an. 395 Kilometer über der Erde steuerte Kommandeur Gibson den Shuttle per Hand an die Raumstation. Und das bei einer Geschwindigkeit von 28.000 Kilometern in der Stunde. Eine Meisterleistung. 2 Minuten blieben ihm für das komplizierte Andockmanöver der Weltraumgiganten. 120 Minuten später trafen die Besatzungen erstmals zusammen. Die Premiere für die neue Kooperation der Weltraummächte USA und Russland ist damit gelungen.
Hello and welcome. Just ahead on this edition of World News. Remember the space race? Astronauts and cosmonauts trying to get there first? Well, they've gotten there together and now they're taking the same path.
Down here on Earth, a shopping trip proved astronauts and cosmonauts are enjoying a reunion in space. For the first time in 20 years, a U.S. and Russian spacecraft have come together in orbit.
The Space Shuttle Atlantis docked with the Mir space station just a little while ago. CNN's John Holliman was one of many of us here watching in amazement. He joins us now.
It was quite, it's kind of like the 3 of us. You know, we never get together as a threesome, and now we are. The astronauts and cosmonauts have been planning this for just a long, long time. And there was a lot of anticipation there would be big problems once they got up there. Hoot Gibson, the commander of the shuttle, had to steer this thing within, about this much leeway to get it where it was going to go. And the pictures that you see here show the actual docking itself. The mirror is on the top left-hand side of your screen with the shuttle at the bottom left, and then the camera that Hoot Gibson was using to steer himself into the docking adapter on board the mirror is on the right. in probably 5 or 10 seconds, you'll see the two pieces of spaceship come together. It was just an amazing event. We got pictures from the Mir, we got pictures from the Shuttle Atlantis, and now the two vehicles are docked. They have done the leak check, they've gotten together. You saw that the big wave photograph, all 10 of the people, most people who've ever been in space at the same time on the same sort of spaceship in the history of manned spaceflight in the world. And what we've got to show you is the beginning of this, when the shuttle commander, Gibson, went in, shook hands with Vladimir Dezhurov, and you can hear the applause there. It wasn't from down here on Earth, or actually it was from Mission Control in Houston. I talked to Dan Golden, who's the administrator of NASA, who watched the whole thing in Mission Control just outside of Moscow. And he said his counterpart in the Russian space program, a huge bear of a guy, Yuri Kopchev, who weighs 300 pounds, came over, threw his arms around Golden, and Golden said he almost didn't recover, but it was a big moment. And a lot of tears on both sides of the ocean as this event happened. Here's what the astronauts looked like when they did the big wave. That's a shot that'll go in the history books. As we were talking earlier today, John, and the other folks who were participating in our coverage, it just seemed to me amazing that we were able to participate with a really good front row seat to this thing in history. This is one of the things that will definitely go into the history books. Another place where people were watching, as I said, was the Johnson Space Center in Houston. CNN's Miles O'Brien is out there. He's been there as well. And Miles, you tell me, you were pretty close to one of the astronauts who was there, who may well get to go up to the Mir at some point. What was the atmosphere like around you when this thing happened?
A lot of relief, a lot of excitement. A high-stakes mission for NASA. NASA is putting all of its chips, as it looks toward the future, into the International Space Station. In order to build an International Space Station, you need to work well with your international partners. This was a significant milestone on a technical level in many ways. It proved that some of their equipment works. It proved that they can communicate well and coordinate such a mission in a timely manner. It proved that, quite frankly, the flying could be done because it was a complex task, even though Gibson made it look easy. So this was a significant milestone. It will be looked back upon as a turning point for NASA and for the Russian space program. And it remains to be seen, however, whether that's going to lead to an International Space Station. A lot of other issues ahead, a long road ahead, but an important first step.
I was talking, Miles, while you were talking just now, we saw some NASA animation of one version of the International Space Station sort of float by around you. That's certainly the ultimate step, I guess, as NASA continues to plan these missions where they dock with the smaller Russian space station, the Mir, in preparation for doing the actual construction on this big international station, which will have contributions from Japan, from the European Space Agency, from the Canadians. It's really quite a thing. As you continue to cover this, have you been able to talk to any of the NASA managers? Are they feeling good about this?
Well, I've just been looking at the briefing, which is going on even as we speak, and there's a fair amount of elation, that's safe to say. As I say, the stakes were high, and the fact that this was a success and came off without a hitch, or at least so it seems, heartens them quite a bit. This is just the beginning of phase one, though, in a three-phased approach, which NASA hopes will ultimately lead to this International Space Station. There will be a total of 7 dockings, including this one, between space shuttles and space station Mir. That will go a long way toward practicing techniques for construction in space. Spacewalks are planned with cosmonauts and astronauts. Equipment will be transported back and forth, and so will astronauts and cosmonauts. And once that phase is over with, and you start looking toward the construction of the International Space Station, which is supposed to begin in late 1997, then those issues well have been worked out as far as dealing with dockings and communication and moving materiel and cosmonauts and astronauts into space, because we're talking about 35 launches to get this huge, as big as 3 747 space station built in orbit. 20 of them shuttle launches, lots of spacewalk time, an incredibly complex task, and so there's still a long way to go and a lot to learn here.
Miles O'Brien, thanks a lot. One of the lessons, Hillary, that they want to learn about this is how is the human body affected by being in space weightless for more than 100 days. I haven't done the math today, but it's about 108 days.
But the Russians have been up there for even longer than that, haven't they?
But they haven't had the sophisticated medical test equipment that is aboard the shuttle right now, or that will be available to them on the ground in Florida and Texas after they return to Earth. Norm Thagard, is the American who's now been in space longer than any other American. He's a medical doctor. Weightless adaptation is his specialty. So he's been using his cosmonaut buddies and himself as guinea pigs the whole time they've been up there. Now that they're aboard the shuttle, Dr. Ellen Baker, who is also a specialist in this, will take the 3 people who've been up there the longest, put them back in this hospital room or doctor's office, if you like, in the back of the shuttle. Yeah, and it's going to be awful. Thagard told me at the beginning of this that he was not really looking forward to being stuck and having blood drawn and all his bodily fluids kept in baggies, but that is what's happening, and it's going to continue to happen for some months into the future.
All right, John Holliman, thanks very much for all that insight and information.
Always good to see you.
Die Raumfähre Atlantis traf die Raumstation Mir zum Rendezvous im All.
Präzisionsarbeit in 395 Kilometern über Zentralasien, über der Grenze zwischen Russland und der Mongolei. Die amerikanische Raumfähre Atlantis bewegt sich mit einer Geschwindigkeit von etwa 3 Metern pro Sekunde an die russische Raumstation Mir. Links im Bild am unteren Ende die Raumfähre Atlantis, oben die Undock-Vorrichtung der Mir. Der Abstand 3 Meter. Rechts die Sicht der Manövrierkamera an Bord der US-Raumfähre. Pünktlich wie im Fahrplan vorgesehen, dann das Undock-Manöver um 15 Uhr deutscher Zeit. 20 Jahre nach dem ersten Zusammentreffen von Soyuz und Apollo. Ein leichter Ruck, als die beiden jeweils 100 Tonnen schweren Kolosse aufeinandertreffen, bei einer Umlaufgeschwindigkeit von 28.000 Kilometern pro Stunde. Der Händedruck der beiden Kommandanten markiert den Auftakt zum Bau einer Raumstation, an der sich auch die Europäische Raumfahrtagentur ESA und die Japaner beteiligen. Für NASA-Manager Brian Welch ein historisch-politisches Ereignis. Wegen knapper Finanzen kommen verschiedene Nationen zueinander und geben unserer Forschung einen zusätzlichen Sinn, sagt er. Die Amerikanerin Ellen Baker umarmt ihren US-Kollegen Norman Thagard, der 105 Tage lang als Gast in der russischen Station verbracht hat. 100 Stunden lang werden die beiden Raumfahrzeuge aneinander gekoppelt und damit Austragungsort des mit 10 Astronauten größten Weltraumtreffens sein.
It was something like an out-of-this-world peace summit as former adversaries linked up in space for only the second time. The first one was 20 years ago. Russian and American crew members traded gifts and posed for a photo session after the U.S. Space Shuttle Atlantis docked with the Russian space station Mir. Here are some sights and sounds from the moment.
По-нашему будет 15 метров.
Say again, Norm, the music's a little loud.
This is only Russian music.
Very entertaining.
Atlantis Houston, you have a go for approach and docking on time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. We copy. Go for approach and docking on time.
I tell you what, that is quite an inspiring sight, watching the shuttle come up this close.
Yeah, you guys look good too. We are so lucky that we get to be the ones to do this.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. There are a lot of folks following this, I'm sure, on the ground, and by golly, we're one of very few people who could say we were actually here when it happened.
Flight controllers here standing by for contact and capture of the 2 vehicles against one another.
Houston, Atlantis, we have capture.
Copy, capture.
With the capture initiated between Atlantis and Mir, 20 years after Apollo Soyuz, a U.S. spacecraft and a Russian spacecraft are once again joined in orbit.
We've got spectacular live TV. A lot easier without gravity.
You guys are upside down. Welcome to the base.
This was a pretty spectacular day for all of us, and it was a real thrill for us to get to see the Mir floating freely out there as it has done for so many years now, and After all the training and the preparation, it seems hard to believe that we're actually there, but indeed we are. Спасибо, Volodya. Сколько лет, сколько зим.
Gibson replied that it's been a long time since Apollo Soyuz, the first docking between international spacecraft 20 years ago. Gibson said, we will build cooperation based on friendship into the future, and this is a very important step along the way.
Nach dem erfolgreichen Andocken der amerikanischen Raumfähre Atlantis an die russische Station Mir reichten sich die Kommandanten der beiden Raumfahrzeuge fast 400 Kilometer über der Erde die Hände.
Präzisionsarbeit im All. Äußerst behutsam, aber pünktlich legte die Raumfähre Atlantis an der Weltraumstation Mir an. Wir haben uns eingefangen, sagt Kommandant Gibson. Eine historische Verbindung. Erstmals seit 20 Jahren treffen sich Amerikaner und Russen wieder zu einem gemeinsamen Weltraumunternehmen. Die amerikanischen Astronauten steigen um zu ihren Kollegen aus Russland. Und dieser Handschlag soll das gemeinsame Ziel besiegeln. Den Bau einer internationalen Raumstation im All. Schon in 2 Jahren soll damit begonnen werden. 5 Tage werden die Raumfahrer zusammen sein und dabei vor allem medizinische Tests durchführen. Eine weitere Vorbereitung für das gemeinsame Leben im Weltraum, das schon kurz nach der Jahrtausendwende zur alltäglichen Routine werden soll. Angesichts massiver Haushaltskürzungen brauchen beide Seiten diesen Erfolg. Ehrgeizige Ziele im Weltraum, das ist die Botschaft dieser Mission, können, wenn überhaupt, nur noch gemeinsam erreicht werden.
From CNN International, this is World News with Reed Collins in Washington.
Today, 100 tons of U.S. Space Shuttle meeting with 123 tons of Russian space station. The proverbial rock in the hard place and the irresistible and the immovable. U.S. astronauts handled the coupling with ease and with grace. Hardly a jolt was felt as history was made in Earth orbit. CNN's John Holliman reports.
The docking of the Shuttle Atlantis and the Russian space station Mir came in right on schedule. Cameras on the shuttle were able to show us the Mir. Then cameras on Mir took a close look at the shuttle from above it. When the docking came, we looked from the side on your left and from a camera pointed into the middle of Mir's docking port on the right. These were the words which were waited for on the ground.
Houston, Atlantis, we have capture.
With that, the docking was underway. For 2 hours, astronauts and cosmonauts made sure nothing was leaking, and then the hatches opened. And for the first time in 20 years, Americans and Russians on separate ships were shaking hands in orbit. The 2 ships will remain docked until July 4th, while the long-term space travelers get tested to find out how much their bodies have changed while they've been away from Earth.
That's John Holliman with the first of 7 planned dockings in space.
It was something like an out-of-this-world peace summit as former adversaries linked up in space for only the second time. The first one was 20 years ago. Russian and American crew members traded gifts and posed for a photo session after the U.S. Space Shuttle Atlantis docked with the Russian space station Mir. Here are some sights and sounds from the moment.
По-нашему будет 15 метров. Say again, Norm, the music's a little loud.
This is only Russian music.
Very entertaining.
Atlantis, Houston, you have a go for approach and docking on time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. We copy. Go for approach and docking on time.
I tell you what, that is quite an inspiring sight, watching the shuttle come up this close.
Yeah, you guys look good too. We are so lucky that we get to be the ones to do this.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. There are a lot of folks following this, I'm sure, on the ground, and by golly, we're one of very few people who could say we were actually here when it happened.
Flight controllers here standing by for contact and capture of the 2 vehicles against one another.
Houston, Atlantis, we have capture.
Copy, capture.
With the capture initiated between Atlantis and Mir, 20 years after Apollo Soyuz, a U.S. spacecraft and a Russian spacecraft are once again joined in orbit.
We've got spectacular live TV. A lot easier without gravity.
You guys are upside down. Welcome to the base.
This was a pretty spectacular day for all of us, and it was a real thrill for us to get to see the Mir floating freely out there as it has done for so many years now. And after all the training and the preparation, it seems hard to believe that we're actually there, but indeed we are. Спасибо, Volodya. Сколько лет, сколько зим.
Gibson replied that it's been a long time since Apollo Soyuz, the first docking between international spacecraft 20 years ago. Gibson said, we will build cooperation based on friendship into the future, and this is a very important step along the way.
We'd all like to tell you how inspiring it was to watch our country's two great spacecraft dock together out there, and it's just they're beautiful spacecraft.
Dave, we agree. This was a pretty spectacular day for all of us, and it was a real thrill for us to get to see the Mir floating freely out there as it has done for so many years now. And after all the training and the preparation, it seems hard to believe that we're actually there, but indeed we are.
This is Mission Control Houston aboard the Mir space station in Atlantis. The crew's day is winding down as they approach their evening meal time. They're almost getting to the end of their active duty day, and we'll move into that time frame that is the evening time frame where they have a couple of hours to get ready to begin their 8-hour sleep period. We're currently receiving live television from Atlantis as it's docked to the Mir station. The two spacecraft creating the largest spacecraft ever in Earth orbit at a mass of almost 500,000 pounds. At present, the two are above the Pacific Ocean, well off the coast of South America, at an altitude of 216 nautical miles.